Gee, I wish I had more laptops to review. Ow. Hi. So here is lots of laptops. In fact, there's something from everybody here, all the mainstream manufacturers anyway. So what I thought I'd do is review all of the mainstream manufacturers' entry-level gaming laptops, or rather their entry-level chassis. Because what I was trying to do was just buy the cheapest laptop from all of these manufacturers that I could find in Australia at the time I went to buy them. So that's what we've done. And what that's resulted in is a very wide variety of specifications here. In fact, spoiler alert, this guy right here is ridiculously powerful compared to the rest of them. But, you know, what we've got regardless is each manufacturer's cheapest laptop chassis. So I can easily form an opinion on all of them, and we can do an in-depth review on all of them and see how they're built and see what they look like on the inside and if there's anything stupid going on. Spoiler alert, there is. So this is an HP, something, I'm going to read the box. HP 15S EQ2232AU. Brilliant, that's catchy, I love that model name. This one has an AMD Ryzen 5 5500, which is not a 5500, it's a 4000 series, and I feel like I got ripped off, and that's annoyed me. 512GB solid state drive, 8GB of DDR4. Oh, and it says, on the box, it says 15.6-inch Full HD LED display, 250 nits. Any guesses what kind of screen that's going to be? 3-cell 41-watt-hour battery, blah, 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 blah. So this is a big silver-painted piece of plastic. I don't know what you would really expect from an entry-level HP, but it's probably about that. It feels cheap. It feels like cheap plastic that won't age well. That's what it feels like, okay? It's probably going to end up with a whole bunch of smudges and scratches all over it. What have we got around the outside? Well, on the bottom, we've got some vents and a conspicuous lack of screws. I can only see two. You can tell I already know what's going on with that. Yep, there's screws under the feet. There are screws under these feet on these, and that annoys me, especially because it's got socketed RAM and a replaceable SSD. So we've got some ventilation, which is, you know, probably more than enough for the AMD APU that's in here. This is going to be a little bit of a theme here, but we've got a full-size SD card slot, and I'm confused as to what anybody is using those for on entry-level laptops with not very good screens. Right next to that, and in fact, this is something HP seems to do, right next to it, 2 millimeters apart, there's a headphone jack. Then we've got a power LED drive access light, which, you know, on a modern computer is just going to be flashing like crazy forever because something's always happening and I don't really know why it's relevant. Anyway, won't go off on a rant about that. USB-C port of some sort that's not really labeled, it's just USB-C, HDMI of some sort. Nothing around the back, except we do have the usual little concealed vent at the hinge. Don't panic, there's nothing wrong with that at this tier. Around this side, we have a normal-ish but kind of small barrel jack adapter and two USB-A ports that are ridiculously close together because this is a thing that HP does for some reason. They're just obsessed with putting their ports too close together. So if you have a normal-sized thing in one of these and then a slightly wide flash drive, you're not plugging it in. Too bad. Basically nothing on the front of these. Ooh, hinge test. You know what? It honestly feels fine on this. That's kind of a fine feeling hinge. It makes noises and the thing kind of slaps around. You may have noticed I grabbed the bottom before I opened it. Yeah, that's a thing with these entry-level laptops. You can't do the one hand open, you got to grab the base. So there's obviously not much structure here. There's not much weight, there's not much structure, but on the plus side, I mean, it's a bit wobbly, and crunchy sounding, but this hinge sounds fine and it seems fine. At some point, we're going to have gone in there and had a bit of a look, which will be in the big review video for this one and all the rest. But for now, this hinge seems fine. I'm deeming it fine. So inside here, we've got a sort of a high effort texture on the bezel around the screen. I don't think my camera is going to focus on that in this lighting. But they've put a little bit of effort into coming up with a unique texture around the screen. I don't know if that makes this any more luxurious than it otherwise was, but it's there. So it's a bit of a thought that counts situation there. We've got a row of what looks like vents up here. I'm not sure if it actually ventilates any air in. It probably doesn't, but it does in fact have the stereo speakers in here. So they are up firing on this. Hooray, 100 points to Team HP for up firing speakers. The result of that though is that the keyboard is far too far this way. So if you've got massive hands like me, guess what? Your palms are sitting on this edge. Is it a nice edge? Nope, it's sharp. Brilliant. Perfectly executed, guys. Love it. It's rough. This doesn't quite fit together properly, so you've got all sorts of little plastic, off-cutty feeling edges digging into your palms while you're typing. That's very annoying. As for the keyboard, if it was actually mounted nicely, it would probably feel fine. The switches are quite good. The keys, are decent. They're decently spaced. They're decently weighted. But the keyboard deck rattles. It rattles and moves and squishes. Trackpad is just, it's just everything is squishy in here. Overall, this definitely feels cheap, but there are some design flourishes. It's trying. Like, it's silver and like there's a texture here which is made using the in-mold roller method. It's sort of, some effort's gone in. Things go a little bit wrong once you've turned it on. Look at that, it's a TN panel. Ugh. Yeah, we've gone back a few years here. It is full HD, hooray, but it's a horrible, horrible TN panel with awful viewing angles. And yeah, you can tell you're using a cheap laptop. It's awful. And on the inside for this one, we've got socketed RAM with 1 slot spare. So we've got 8 gigs in single channel and 2 slots. Fantastic. And we have 1 SSD slot. Pretty easily replaceable battery, which is screwed in, and a big empty space here. Right, Dell's entry. So of course we've got the Inspiron 15-3000 series. In this case, 15.6-inch HD display. Once again, you're going to be able to guess what screen that is. AMD Athlon Gold 7220U processor, 8 gigs of memory, 256 gig SSD. That's about it. So this thing is, look, it's disgusting. Look at it. The plastics on it are absolutely putrid. It's sort of a weird, it's like a caricature of the plastics that cheap laptops were made of 10 years ago. It's nasty. It looks bad. It feels bad. It feels cheap. It feels hollow and fragile. Not a good impression. This will make you feel like you bought a cheap laptop 100% all the time. There is absolutely no concession made to looking or feeling nice. It's quite thin and light. I'll give it that, right? We've got sort of normal amount of ventilation down the bottom, 1 fan that you can see in there, 4 little tiny rubber feet that don't really lift it very much. This one's got one of those lifty hinges, doesn't it? Yes, it does. Around the outside, we've got two little down-firing speakers on here, down the bottom there. Not too much connectivity, but of course there is the why is that there full-size SD card reader, USB-A port on this side, and a headphone microphone jack, DC-in jack here with a light, HDMI output, another USB-A, and then a USB-C. Nothing whatsoever on the front. So, hinge-wise, it's bad, okay? It's hard to put this into words, but it feels like you're bending everything in there all the time. Every time you move this screen, you feel like you're bending stuff. Things are flexing and bending. So it is a droppy, lifty hinge thing. I don't know why manufacturers have started insisting on doing this. It's bad. This is a laptop. Don't do that. It's going to dig into my legs. But it's not that bad. It's at least rounded, the part that sticks down the bottom, right? So you can kind of rest it on your lap and survive. It's not the end of the world. If you actually wanted to put this laptop on your lap. I mean, you don't. You want to just leave it alone and do something else. It doesn't get much better with the keyboard or the screen. I mean, honestly, the initial reaction that you have to this is, oh, that's an awful laptop, isn't it? Yes. So the keyboard, I think, is the worst here. It's sort of tied with one of the others, but look, the keyboard deck is just made of hot cheese that's melted in the oven. It's squishy as hell. The keys have the exact same god-awful plastic and texture as the keyboard deck. It's just, there's obviously no structure under this. It's far too squishy and just yucky. Ugh. Especially here, this part is just... Can you hear it squishing noise? So the trackpad's kind of fine. I mean, there's nothing to like here. You wouldn't walk up to this in a shop and go, oh, that's nice, I'm going to buy that one. You just wouldn't. In fact, I think out of everything else here, you'd just buy one of the others because they kind of present well. Doesn't present well. Look at that screen. Look at it. Horrible, nasty TN thing. But it's not even full HD. It's 1366 by 768. So this is actually a screen from the Dark Ages. This is actually a screen from the Windows Vista, Windows 7 era. Horrible. Weirdly, it supports FreeSync. I don't know why. It supports 40 to 60 hertz FreeSync. It's not enough space. It looks bad. It suits this laptop, right? The horrible screen suits the laptop that it's in. I'm almost depressed about having to do a full review that includes this, because it's just so bad. And on the inside of the Inspiron 15, we've got a big empty space that does nothing, a tiny 41 watt-hour battery, and soldered RAM. At least the SSD is socketed. Bloody fingerprints that won't come off. This is Lenovo's entry. This is the IdeaPad 1 or IdeaPad Slim 1, depending on where you look. This one was hilariously cheap, and that's for a reason. I'm not really sure why this configuration exists. This one has got an AMD Athlon Silver 7120U, and would you believe the 7220U that's in the Dell Inspiron is a 2-core 4-thread chip. This 7120U is 2 cores, 2 threads. That's a new chip. AMD actually build that. Now, you could buy it now to put in actual computers. That's amazing. And it's got a Radeon 610M stuck to it, a 2-core, 2-thread chip with like kind of fine integrated graphics. Bizarre. Other than that, we've got a 128GB SSD, which is, again, like, you can still buy those. Apparently Lenovo can get them from somewhere. 4GB of RAM. Now, you may think, wow, that must be an old laptop. No, it isn't. That 7120U is a fairly new chip, and this runs Windows 11. And in fact, it was built late last year. I think it was built in October 2023, this thing. So a laptop with a 128GB SSD, a 2-core, 2-thread CPU, and 4GB of RAM that runs Windows 11. And would you believe it's loaded up with bloatware too? That's what Lenovo thinks is acceptable to sell people in this day and age. In Australia, apparently our market wants this tier of laptop. I'm confused by this. Regardless, the color is cloud gray. Yep, it's a bit cloudy. It's a little bit plasticky, but it feels better than that Dell. In fact, everything does here. But it definitely feels a little bit less bad. Like, this plastic is not particularly lovely, but it's just not as bad. So we've got a lot of ventilation down the bottom here. 2 sort of semi-bottom mounted speakers down the bottom, which is almost passable. Up the top, we've got this very fingerprint magnety, sort of shiny silk plastic. I don't mind this. Also, the logo, if you can tell, is iridescent. Wow, fancy. On the inside, it looks better than it is. Uh-oh, it turned on. It does that. Oh, you can already tell what the screen is. Yeah, it seems to be the exact same screen as the one in the Dell. It's disgusting. Ugh. Those will all be getting measured, so I'll whinge about that in a future video, but ugh. You definitely don't want to use this one. Did you notice how long it's taking to log in? Yeah, not fast. In fact, it's not even acceptable. So this looks like a normal Lenovo product, doesn't it? The keys are sort of the nice Lenovo shape. It's sort of well spaced. It's shiny. It's got that nicely finished plastic again, and yet another iridescent logo. How fun. Except that's where the good bits end. It's squishy as hell. The keyboard has almost no travel and feels ghastly. It's not as bad as the Dell's. It's fine, but it's ghastly, but it's fine. Like, you could type on this. I could type on this, I just don't want to. Trackpad is kind of small for the space here, and it squishes too much when you click it, but like, it's all right. The tracking is fine, and the clicker is fine. It doesn't do any weird phantom clicks or anything. I mean, it's fine. Hopefully you can upgrade that RAM though. Nope, the RAM is soldered. Yes, that's right. This 2023-24 model computer that ships with Windows 11 has got 4GB of soldered-in RAM. Fantastic. Next up, that's right, it's old mate MSI, my favorite laptop brand. This is Modern 15 B7M, and the model name gets even longer than that. B7M256AU. So this is the cheapest configuration. When I bought it, again, it might not be in your market. I can't do anything about that. This was the cheapest one in the country. So we have a Ryzen 5 7530U. If you're confused by that, that's a 7000 series means nothing. It just means it was made in, I guess, 2023. 5 is Ryzen 5, 3 means Zen 3, so we're on the 5000 series architecture, which is very good, just not up to date. 0 means 0. I guess it means there's no interesting graphics in it. I believe if it had a 5 in there, it'd probably have a 680M, but it doesn't. It's got Vega something, Vega 7, I think, in this one. We have a massive 512GB SSD and 16 gigabytes of memory. That sticks out like a sore thumb in this crowd. It seems as if MSI thinks that the bare minimum for this sort of laptop, like for an entry-level sort of 15-incher, should be, oh, it's a 1080p screen as well. So, you know, a 1080p screen, which is IPS, half a terabyte SSD, and 16 gigs of RAM. I mean, good. As for the actual hardware itself, it's surprisingly big and heavy. Quite a lot of ventilation down the bottom there. We've got, once again, the super fingerprinty semi-gloss plastic up the top, and I'm going to pick on something in a moment, but we'll come back to that. And you've got the sort of more normal, cheaper laptop plastic down the bottom, but it doesn't feel too bad. It doesn't like creak or anything when you just move it around. So this one's actually sort of a surprise hit, I suppose. It feels quite nice. Connectivity-wise, so we've got the speakers are sort of, once again, semi-down-firing. Around the edges, we've got a micro SD card slot over here, 2 USB-A ports that are almost spaced well enough apart. Nothing around the back because guess what? Well, apart from the vents, yeah, we've got a stupid hinge, stupid droppy lifty hinge. Around this side, we've got a DC in jack, which is once again proprietary. We've got HDMI out, USB-A and a USB-C, and a combo headphone microphone jack. Now, there's something that I really do need to pick on. Just visually, look at that MSI logo, right? Remember the way that looks. Yeah, I heard that too. Look, there's a different MSI logo in here. Do they know what their logo looks like? Seriously, you've got a different, like, I come up to my laptop to open it, I see this badge, and then, oh God, that noise is awful. And then I see this one. Why? So, yeah, big elephant in the room. The hinge is crap. I guess you probably expected that. I mean, something had to be wrong here, didn't it? The hinge is absolutely terrible, and it's not just that it makes a horrible noise and that it's a stupid lifty hinge, which, you know, I hate. I hate these lifty hinges, because, once again, this one digs into your leg. It's worse than the Inspiron because the laptop is heavy and it comes to a sharper point. It's very annoying to have this bearing down on your lap for any period of time. There's no way to get comfortable under it. It's just stupid. That's not how you design a laptop, guys. It's really fragile feeling. And the most fun part about it is that not only does it have a little bit of the wobbles, but it will gradually sort of go away as you use it. Let's put it to a slightly wider angle. If you're using it on your lap like that, over time, did you see that? It just slaps open. It just falls open. Look at that. It takes like no effort. I'm not touching it. It just flop. Now, why would it do that? Well, you know what? I'm going to hazard a guess that it does that because it's very loosely wound up so that it doesn't rip its crappy construction apart. I don't know that, but we're going to find out when we pull it apart. But yeah, it's probably not a good sign, and it's very annoying to use. See that? It just falls open on its own after a certain point. Flop. Very annoying, very unimpressive on an otherwise actually really good laptop. So in here we have a surprisingly good keyboard. This seems to be one of MSI's gaming laptop keyboards. It feels very nice. It's clicky. It's got kind of nice key feedback. I really like this keyboard. So we're doing all right on the functionality front, and would you believe it? It doesn't squish. It's strong. This part's strong, not the hinges. This part feels very strong. This is actually making a pretty good impression. And you click something the first time because the trackpad's garbage. It's got that horrible, where's the part that makes the noise? It's got that horrible feeling of doing a double click, and it rattles and it's loud and it's nasty, and I hate it. Hate it. All right, so despite the seemingly good start on this one, we've got socketed RAM. I wasn't expecting that because it identifies as 2 slots in Windows, and I assumed it would be slots. So what we have here is 16 gigabytes of soldered RAM. At least that's enough RAM, right? I mean, it's a mixed blessing, but at least it's enough RAM. Socketed Wi-Fi and a socketed SSD, and that's about it. Right, stop me if you've seen this before. It's the Acer Aspire 3, the original potato that showed up on this channel last year, and I just kind of didn't have time to do a review of. Well, it's happening. So this one is an Acer Aspire 3 A31524PR43X in pure silver. This one has a Ryzen 3 7320U, 8 gigs of RAM, 256 gigabyte SSD, and some sort of 15.6-inch screen. Guess what? The internet told me this was an IPS panel, and it's not, and it's awful. Nothing else to talk about there, really. So around the outside, it's a big piece of plastic. It feels quite cheap. It's painted, so it probably won't age very well. And as you can see by these 2 stupid little blobs, it's got a stupid hinge. In fact, this is the reason, these laptops by Acer are the reason I hate those hinges that drop down and lift it up for ergonomics and cooling, which is nonsense anyway. It's so sharp when it's open. Do you see this? Do you see how it's square? It's actually like pretty well styled. It's very square. Well, what doesn't feel nice against your legs? Square stuff. What else doesn't? Sharp things. This is a lovely combination when you're using it as a laptop of a sharp edge and pointy bits. It's just, what the hell? Other than that, it's a cheap silver laptop. I mean, it's square. There's nothing to talk about. There's a tiny Acer logo, and it kind of says Aspire here, and that's nice. Plastic down the bottom feels cheap as hell. Loads of ventilation though. Good job there. Don't know why the rear feet are so big when they don't get used, because it just digs its stupid sharp bit into. So around this side, we've got some lights, combo headphone microphone jack, USB 3 something port, Kensington lock, DC in jack, USB-C, HDMI, and another USB-A. Nothing interesting, nothing on the front. Semi-forward facing speakers, which is fine, I guess. Bleh. That didn't feel nice. Yeah, it feels cheap. The hinge feels cheap. The way it smacks into the desk. I mean, at least it doesn't make that horrible loud clack noise that the MSI does. But yeah, no, I don't like that. Oh, and you can't open it with one hand. That's a theme. In here we've got, cheap laptop things. This is a pretty bad keyboard. I don't want to use this. I mean, it's got a kind of usable number pad. The trackpad's kind of fine. It's not that squishy. Like, nah, it's fine, I guess. I mean, if you only ever used it on a desk, and so it couldn't dig its hinge into you. I mean, it's screen, however, yeah, it's just another horrible TN panel with awful viewing angles, and it's just, yeah. Once again, look at that, the RAM is soldered, so you can't have more than 8 gigabytes. At least it's 8 gigs and not 4. Well, anyway, we've got a very cheap looking socketed SSD in here, and like all this just empty space, but they do use this chassis for like some other stuff, like quite a few other things. What I kind of like looking at this is that green board and like just bare copper heat pipe. It's kind of fun, it's old school. All right, and last in the pile is this invisible rectangle on my desk. This is an Asus Vivobook Go, which means that it's their entry-level Vivobook. There's something in this that makes it anything but entry-level, and actually this is my favorite thing here. So Vivobook Go E1504G, catchy name once again. The color is mixed black. Sounds like a factory error that they've decided to name. 15.6-inch OLED screen, yes. Oh. Intel Core i3 N305, which upsets me on a very deep level because it's not a Core i3. Do you know what those Pentium and Celeron CPUs were up until recently? The ones that had a model name that started with N? Atoms. What is the Core i3 in this? It's Atom cores, because it's just the Intel Gracemont cores from an Alder Lake chip, which are modern Atom cores. They're the newest development of the Atom cores. So there's 8 of them. Wow, an 8-core i3. Yes, but they're basically Atom cores. So that's it. I just don't think this should be called a Core i3. When you hear Core i3, you think I'm getting the best Intel processor technology, but like a little version of it. Not I'm getting crappy rubbish cores, but lots of them. It's just, they shouldn't call it that. I don't like it. Stop it. 512 gigabyte SSD and 8 gigabytes of DDR4 memory. Blah, 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 blah. Nothing else to talk about. 50 watt hour battery. So this is a very Asus product. It's sort of boxy and got angular motifs all over it, and I like it. This plastic down here has got a very unique texture on it that doesn't feel or look cheap, so they get full marks for that because even the bottom of it feels better than everybody else's. Generally, the fit and finish on this, I mean, by the standards of being a cheap entry-level tier laptop, it's fine. It looks good, it's well styled, it's kind of fine. Down the bottom, you've got two massive, massive for like being a cheap laptop, round, circular speakers. I recognize these. They're the exact same speakers that are in the Asus TUF A15 and probably others. They're surprisingly big. Top is sort of once again, a semi-gloss plastic that picks up fingerprints like you wouldn't believe. Connectivity-wise, we've got combo headphone microphone jack, USB-C, USB-A, HDMI, and a DC in jack on this side. Lots of crap on the side that your mouse goes on. Don't know about that, unless you're left-handed. Don't want to discriminate against lefties. On this side, you've just got one USB-A port hanging out on its own. Up the front, you got a nice little notch that you can easily grab with your finger to open it, but no, once again, no. Hold it down with your other hand while you open it up. In here, whoa, grubby. I'm going to quickly fix that. At least slightly better. Look how reflective that screen is. Ooh, hello me. So what we've got in here is just a fantastic keyboard. I was surprised by this. This was one of the cheaper laptops that I've got here, would you believe, despite having an OLED screen. But the keyboard is actually really nice. I think it's my favorite. The MSI keyboard is fantastic, but I think this one's my favorite. I think it's got a bit more travel and it's really deeply satisfying to type on. Keyboards are incredibly subjective, but I'm massively into this one. Perfectly good trackpad. It's nothing to write home about, but it feels fine. It doesn't do anything that annoys me. Meh, it's fine. Let's power it on and just look at the desktop and go, ooh, look at that. Oh, beautiful. I love OLED panels. 1080p, 60 Hz feels much faster than that as they tend to do because OLEDs are incredibly good at pixel response times, basically instantaneous. 60 Hz is just fine on one of these. And you know what? 32 core XE graphics should have been enough to sort of play some old games acceptably, but it's not because the memory is single channel. Nah. So this should be quite a nice laptop, and certainly for the 697 Australian dollars I paid for it, this should be really good. I mean, look at the size of these speakers, and it's like nicely constructed, but the RAM is solid. Anyway, as usual, if you made it this far, congratulations on your patience. There will be more videos on these laptops coming, including one big comparison test. So it'll be like a nuclear review, but with 6 laptops in it. Imagine that, crazy. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, as always, and I'll be seeing you soon. Right, so obviously the most reasonable test of performance of all of these low-end laptops is to see what sort of a time I can set in this particular hill climb track in BeamNG in the IBishu Covet 1.5 ZXI Special Edition manual. I'm currently using a Logitech G920. I think it's a G920. And a manual shifter, and I'm going to have to try and stop the shifter from clacking a whole lot in the audio recording. We'll see how we go with that. It's probably going to annoy the hell out of me. Too bad. So I've actually made a big mess on my normal desk. I might pop a quick photo up of what I've done here. What we're going to be doing is running through all of these laptops in the order I think will be fastest to most depressing. First of all, we're going to be quickly doing a lap on a Lenovo IdeaPad Pro, which has a Core Ultra 7 with an integrated Arc 8 GPU. That, I think, represents the absolute best possible case scenario for gaming performance on an integrated GPU on Windows. So that's what we're doing here. I've got the Afterburner overlay up and ready to go. We are at 720p low settings in BeamNG, and as you can see, this GPU and CPU is absolutely ripping along at way over 100 FPS in this one. So what I'm going to do is quickly jump inside the car so I know what I'm doing. Do a lap, hopefully not crash too many times in the process, and then we'll quickly switch to the MSI Modern 15. Rightio, let's go. The whole internet's about to laugh at my driving skills. Look at that, I've almost lost it on the first corner. That's even after a few practice laps. I thought, so that I don't look completely hopeless at this, I'll do, 3, 4, 5 practice laps first, just to get good at it, and then my driving skills won't be the bottleneck for the performance on this. The performance of the laptop will be. So yeah, we'll definitely see how that goes. Ooh. I think I left the force feedback on this wheel turned up way too high. It's basically trying to pull itself out of hand and probably just, oh yeah, no, overcooks back. So there we go. Anyway, ignoring how crappy my lap time is going to be, as you can see, this Intel Core Ultra 7 and Arc 8 integrated GPU is having absolutely no trouble here. I can tell you that this one will actually run this game quite happily at 1080p on the normal settings. You're getting 40-something FPS, but it feels responsive enough, especially with when you're using racing wheel and pedals. I mean, cars are not particularly responsive mechanical objects anyway. They're big, fat, heavy, soggy things. Stop shifting into first on that corner. Big, heavy, soggy things that take a while to respond. So, yeah, 40-something FPS is fine. I'd probably play that on... are we calling it Arc 8? Notebook Chat calls it Arc 8. Otherwise, it's just Intel... what is it? Intel Arc Graphics, I think it identifies as. What's interesting is, as you can see, so this laptop's got 32 gigs of RAM in it, and the GPU can use up to 16 of those, and as you can see, it's using 2 gigs of shared RAM for video memory, 13.6 gigs system RAM is full, so everything other than the MSI Modern 15 is probably going to have a problem here, because they don't have more than 8 gigs of RAM. In fact, one of them's got 4. But we'll see how we go. 720p low is what I'm going to stick to across the board on these. Alrighty. So, as you can see, I'm doing pretty consistent times here. I've had 6 goes at this. We're getting somewhere between 159 and 203. I know that those times are miles apart. But we're going to... well, I'm going to use that 159 as my best time when we switch to the different laptops. So, let's go with that. Alright. Time to grab the MSI Modern 15 and see how we go. Alright, MSI Modern 15. So we're now on a Ryzen 5 7530U. We've got a Radeon Vega 7 iGPU, which, as you can see by the Afterburner overlay, is currently clocked at 2 GHz, so it's one of the refreshed faster Vegas. We're running at 30 watts on the CPU. We've got 16 gigs of RAM on board, and we're using quite a lot of it. Alright, we're back in Jungle Rock Island in BeamNG in the Covet, which is obviously the best car I've made. Let's go. See how I do. So initial impression is we're rather alarmingly at less than half of the frame rate of the Intel Arc 8 iGPU. Jeez, we're sort of barely hanging on to 50 here, nowhere near 60. So, you know, it's noticeably choppier, but still, you know, it's still pretty playable. Really, ooh, it's getting real choppy up here. Responsiveness is still fine. Let's see if I can avoid overcooking this next one. No, I overcooked the one in front of it instead. Shh. No. Go Covet. Go Covet. For anyone that actually plays this game, I don't know if you ever noticed how bad the gearing on this thing is, unless you tinker with it. It's absolutely appalling with the standard gearbox in whatever variant this is. It feels like first gear runs out immediately, and then second gear just kind of goes forever. Tell you what, that well, this MSI's got one of the best screens here. We're good. Second best screen of any of these cheaper laptops here. It's pretty washed out. The red on the interior doesn't look red. It's kind of brown on this screen, which is unfortunate. quite like red interiors in cars. They can be quite polarizing. Oh, I nearly lost it there. There we go. How'd we do? 204. So I was about 1 and a bit seconds slower than I was on the Core Ultra 7. Alright, next. Alright, so we're now on the HP 15S with a Ryzen 5500U, I think, which is actually a Ryzen 4500U, and AMD are liars and HP are liars, and I hate them for that. As you can see, this is going dreadfully well, and I'm certainly not starting to regret my life decisions here. Also, the screen's very yellow. I can't do anything about that. It just is. For some reason, it looks blue as heck on the laptop's internal screen, and through the HDMI out, it's basically peed itself. We've got a 16GB RAM is recommended warning in the top right, at least on this laptop, unlike... I think all of them have soldered RAM, don't they, other than this one? At least you could upgrade it on this one. I could upgrade it on this one for this test, but I'm not. I'm just running them how they came. So, too bad. Now, immediately you may have noticed that we have a frame rate problem. Yes. It's low. It's really low. We're on 720p low. Are we? Let's double check, because perhaps we've actually gone to... You know what? I think it's switched back to a 1080p because it's stupid. Okay, you know what? I don't know what I did, but I made it actually 720p, and now there's a kind of a frame rate. Look at that. So I thought this one might be close to the MSI. It's not. This is terrible. Alright, well, I suppose we'll press on. I can drive at 28 FPS. Surely. Surely this will be fine. Alright, off we go. Keep screwing these launchers up. Okay, it's not 28, it's actually less than that. Ooh, I think it might be choking on the physics a little bit. Wow. I swear I've managed to do that corner without screwing up before. Same with that one. It says, shortly before crashing again. Well, this is a significantly less enjoyable experience. I hope that the rest of them aren't more slow than this, because this is not good. Well, we can hazard some guesses at how that's going to go. So, this laptop has got a Vega 7, just like the MSI. It is an older generation Vega 7. As you can see, it's not running very fast. And also, this laptop insists on running the CPU at 15 watts, which it's currently doing. And that, between that and the fact that it's got a single stick of RAM in it, this ain't going to be fast. If you were to upgrade it to dual channel in pursuit of high performance, you'd basically be wasting your time. A chip of this age is simply not going to be that good at 15 watts. If it was a generation newer, like literally if it was just a 6000 series chip, you kind of get in the ballpark of a Steam Deck's GPU performance, maybe at 15 watts. You get kind of close, get something roughly resembling that. Not on one of these, too old. Especially because it's actually technically 4000 series. Chip just kind of repackaged and rebranded. This is genuinely getting a bit rough. It's genuinely getting a bit difficult, and I'm properly concerned about how the rest of the laptops are going to go. The rest of them are all... No, we've got that Core i3 that I think it should be called an Atom or a Pentium or a Celeron, because it's not an i3. We've got... and then, oh wait, there's a Ryzen 3, and then a couple of Athlons. Those would be interesting. Alright, how did I do? How did I do? 206 by the looks of it. Oh, there you have it, folks. Frames win games, and a lack of them slows you down by 2 seconds. Rightio, Asus Vivobook Go with a Core i3 N305? Is that what we decided it was? I can barely remember. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. I don't know if you can hear the fan noise in the background, but I think this is the noisiest one yet, despite the fact we're only using about 22 watts. So lovely OLED display on this. It looks, well, because the brightness is currently cranked up, it looks even nicer than the screen that it's mirroring to. Okay, so this is bad. The game hasn't loaded in yet, but we're not looking at very high frame rates here, are we? Perhaps once it finishes loading my beautiful covert, it'll go up. Oh, look at that. It did. It went up to 19. Please go up more. 23, 26, yep. Oh, sort of. Okay, well, so it's not worse than the H. Yes, it is. It's worse than the HP. Okay, off we go. See how it holds up through the duration of the lap. Oh, not well. Not well at all. The frame pacing is terrible. Oh, wow. Okay, so the moment I started moving, we dropped all of the frames. Feels like the physics engine is keeping up. It's just really laggy. I don't know if you noticed the really big obvious warning in the right-hand corner as well, rudely telling us not to use that Intel GPU. Well, you know what? It's hard not to agree. So, from what I can gather, well, all of the software that I used to check the specs on this laptop is reporting that it's got one RAM channel, which is not helping the not very big 32-core Xe integrated graphics at all. But even then, jeez, it's doing a lot worse than that Vega 7. The Vega 7 in the HP and the MSI, they're much bigger than this GPU though, so dual channel RAM really helps them, well, when they've got enough watts. The 32-core Iris Xe, really, not Iris. But I keep saying Iris because I'm so used to Xe graphics being the Iris version. So it's a small fraction of an Iris Xe. So 32-core Xe GPU, whatever it's called, Intel UHD graphics probably. Anyway, it's crap. As you can see, it's not good. Yeah. We're really struggling with frame timing. Jeez. It's alright, I got this. Really struggling with frame timing here. It's bad. It's getting very hard to control at times. Oh, no, we're good, we're good. I got it. Alright, well, so I've definitely bent the car a bit, but in general, we're good. How we do? How did we do? 207. You know what? The slower these get, the more they're adding to my time. I'm genuinely not driving as well as the frame rate drops. But it's kind of what you'd expect once we're down below sort of 60. When you start hacking off, well, down below, let's say down below 45, once you start hacking off large percentages of that frame rate, things are just going to go to hell. Well, this was terrible. Unfortunately, I think that the last three are all going to be worse. So what are you doing for the long weekend? Really? That's all? Jeez. Oh, that's a shame. No, not really. Not much. Sitting here watching loading bars, apparently. Right, so this computer that appears to have currently frozen is the Acer Aspire 3. So in this one, we have a Ryzen 3 7320U, which is a 4-core 8-thread chip with a Radeon 610 integrated GPU, and the last three laptops all have a Radeon 610, but with different processor core configurations. We've got 8GB of RAM in this one. I think it's arranged in dual channel, and I think this one constantly runs the CPU at 25 watts, well, the APU at 25 watts total when it's fully loaded, but we'll find out. This is not in a rush, is it? Are we done? Is that it? Okay. Alright, that's bad. So, we're at 22 FPS now. Sinking to new lows here. Alright, so I was struggling significantly at 20 sort of, what would you call the Asus's range, 18 to 25? This is going to be worse, isn't it? Oh well. Off we go. Uh-oh. Lag. It's lagging. Inputs are lagging. This is going to be bad. Yes. Yes, it is. So the best part about this is that this is the third slowest laptop that Ryzen 3 quad core is going to be helping us out here a little bit. Probably not too much by the fact that we're at 100% GPU usage and the package power is only at about 18 watts. I think that we might be getting severely GPU bottlenecked. So yeah, I guess Radeon 610M is not really up to BeamNG. If you're not aware, I guess a lot of people probably won't be, Radeon 610M is a 128 core 6000 series Radeon. So for some perspective on that, a 6900 XT is somewhere around, someone correct me on this, I think it's somewhere around 6000 cores, about 5000, 6000 cores. Going way down the scale, Radeon's 680M is 768 cores. So we've got a very small fraction of a decent GPU in this. Like a decent integrated GPU is many times as big as this, so pretty small. Well, that's bad. I'm good. We'll keep going. We'll keep going. We'll press on. We might not be able to press on. I think I might have just killed the car. No, it's fine. It's fine. I'll be fine. I don't think we're fine. Come on. Come on, Covet. You can do it. The worst thing is, when it's broken like this, I really need to be compensating for the messed up steering, but with the input lag that this has, which is just insane, it's difficult to do so. Regardless, we're pressing on. This is not good. Alright. Bit of a tight left-hander coming up here. Whoop. Don't worry, guys, I got this. Alright, that's the finish up there. Come on. Come on, Covet. You can do it. Nope. Excuse me. You're steering the wrong way. What are you doing? Alright. Look, shh, calm down. Calm, gentle, precise inputs, and we'll be fine. Oh, it's so broken. We might not be fine. I don't think I can get I don't think I can get through that finish line. Oh, oh. Go, Covet. 3 minutes 31. Okay, well, moving on to the last two. This is going to be a disaster. Alright, second last laptop. Dell Inspiron 3530, I think. We have a AMD Athlon 7220U. That's not much CPU. That's 2 cores, 4 threads, and a Radeon 610M. So we're still at 22 FPS, just like the Ryzen 3 in the Acer, but we're using 13 watts to get there. So this is a bit more power efficient for just sitting here not doing anything. If you look at the CPU, you see it's spiking up high often because, yeah, there's just two CPU cores. There's not really any overhead to do anything. So we've got 8 gigs of RAM in this one, thankfully. Well, off we go. Let's see just how bad this is. I think it was the best launch I've done yet. Go Team Inspiron. Alright, it's interesting that the frame pacing is so much better than it was on the Acer. So it's running slow, but it feels much smoother. That being said, the input lag is intense. Ooh. I'm kind of having to... Whoa, ping. Okay, big frame time spike there. I'm kind of having to do everything a split second before I think I should. Oh. 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 Jeez. So, bloody hell. Yeah, I kind of wish that you could see how far out of sync what's on the screen is with my wheel and pedal inputs and shifter inputs. It's really bad. Yeah, it's not good. Is it fine? Is it fine? It's fine. Yes. Don't worry. It's still fine. We're still fine. We're coping. It's honestly just starting to get really stressful. It's been a while since the frame rate was good. I guess the MSI was the last time it was sort of still enjoyable. Alrighty, so I've done better than last time because I haven't crashed quite as badly. So we've managed to get through the finish line. Yeah, we do. 213 something. Yeah. Alright, well, I'm absolutely dreading this, but it's time to get rid of half the processing threads and half the RAM. Well, there you have it. The little Lenovo that couldn't. I've just waited about 10 minutes for it to try and load into the level in BeamNG, and it won't. It's incapable of gaming. Let's just leave it at that. Well, on that entirely predictable note, I guess we're done here. You can't game on 4 gigs of RAM on a 2-core CPU. That's it for this one. More content on these potatoes coming soon. Keep an eye out. If you're not subscribed, perhaps you should be. Goodbye. So, I have a big pile of entry-level laptops, and after tossing up what to do with them for a while, I've decided to subject each of them to its own full-length nuclear review. That means leaving no stone unturned and assessing them all equally regardless of price or configuration, so this will be interesting. We're starting out on a bit of a high note, and things are going to get far worse, but for now, this is the $697 Asus Vivobook Go 15. That Go suffix indicates that this laptop is effectively a stripped-down, cheaper variant of Asus's plastic fantastic mid-range-ish lineup, although in this case, it's been blessed with a gorgeous Samsung AMOLED display. This model also includes what's allegedly a Core i3 CPU, 8GB of RAM, and half a terabyte of SSD storage. Anyway, more on all that later. Design-wise, you're looking at a pretty generic rectangular plastic slab finished here in so-called mixed black, which seems to be a novel way to admit that your plastics don't quite match each other. Interrupting the generally tidy and uncluttered look is this stupid badge on the lid. Thank you, Asus. I have always wanted to go further and explore things with you. There's a few other questionable design choices on this one. Most of the ports are on the right-hand side, so if they're occupied, they're going to get in the way of a mouse if you're right-handed. The hinge lets the lid scrape on the desk if you open it too far. Seriously? And downward-firing speakers are just stupid and really need to go somewhere else. Checking for any lap-murdering protrusions while we're down here, it's mostly clear apart from one small dagger right in the middle. Unfortunately, this little guy doesn't quite touch the desk on its own, so you might hear a little tap coming from this area every now and then while typing or prodding at the trackpad. Dimensions are very compact all round, to the point where the tall rubber feet actually account for a large percentage of the total thickness. It's also nice and lightweight for a 15-inch laptop, but of course the low weight is more a direct byproduct of thin and low-cost materials than anything else. Included in the fully recyclable box and packaging is the usual laptop 65-watt power brick documentation. Nothing exciting here. I'm pleased to report that this unit arrived with absolutely no blemishes or other fit and finish issues, and it doesn't creak when handled or when opening and closing the display. Connectivity isn't too bad, although it could be better. USB 2.0 ports are refusing to die, and the HDMI is version 1.4 from all the way back in 2009. The only replaceable port on this laptop is the single left side USB 2.0 Type A, so if you wear out or break any of the others, too bad. In keeping with the general theme, the typical diving board style clickpad is all plastic, mounted to plastic, and reinforced mostly with plastic. Unsurprisingly, the entire palm rest squishes in every time you click the button. There's also a loud rattle every time you tap to click. Asus's backlit keyboard is a bit of a standout on a laptop in this price range. This almost totally full-sized keyboard has a fantastic feel and surprisingly strong feedback. The layout makes perfect sense to me, and print, screen, insert, and delete all have their own keys. On a less positive note, the white backlighting is PWM dimmed in the low and middle brightness modes, so it flickers noticeably unless it's set to max brightness. The number pad is also slightly undersized, and it would be really nice if the whole laptop wouldn't squish so much while you're typing. Predictably enough, the keyboard is plastic welded onto the top case, so in most cases you're going to be replacing this entire assembly if something goes wrong. The display hinges are tight enough that the display isn't possible to open one-handed, but it does remain locked in place very well once it's open. There is, however, a noticeable amount of wobble, which, when considered against the fairly tight hinges, points to a potential structural issue somewhere. Having a look from inside, you can see there's been some effort put into making the lower hinge brackets as long as possible to spread the load out over a reasonably wide area, so old mate Mr. Wiggle's not hiding in here. Unfortunately, at the other end, inside the lid, things are looking a bit dire, with all the force concentrated over an absolutely tiny area, only a few millimeters tall and 3.5 centimeters wide, bolted straight into soft plastic. Let's attach some numbers to this, shall we? The display lid requires a surprisingly high peak of 750 grams, or 7.35 newtons, of force to lift from fully closed, and 394 grams, or 3.86 newtons, to move in either direction from a 90-degree angle. Calculated over the height of the lid assembly, that means the points where the hinges bolt into the lid, 10 millimeters away from the pivot point, are being yanked on with a shared load of around 17 kilos, or 167 newtons, every time you open the laptop. That's more than 2 kilograms on each of these tiny little screws in their tiny soft plastic houses, every time, and that's assuming you've done it gently. Yep, it's flimsy and it's gonna break. On the plus side, I suppose, the display is mounted to a metal plate which easily unscrews and comes out as a unit instead of being adhered directly to the lid itself, so you could easily swap out a damaged lid with no risk of damage to the display. Speaking of that display, a 1080p AMOLED panel is the polar opposite of what you'd expect in a low-cost computer like this. Brightness is a pretty decent 381 nits, contrast is effectively infinite, and the panel fully covers the sRGB, DCI-P3, and Adobe RGB color gamuts. Color uniformity is basically perfect, and response times are pretty much instantaneous. The only point worthy of criticism is the pentile subpixel layout endemic to Samsung's AMOLED panels causes some chromatic aberration or fringing on text and the edges of some objects. Mounted above the display are a tiny webcam which has been blessed with a privacy shutter and a pair of stereo microphones. The sound system installed in the Vivobook Go is much better than you'd expect, but still nothing mind-blowing. Speaker drivers themselves are round paper units with 1.5cm cones and interesting rubber surrounds, which are a custom design that looks similar to what Asus uses in a few different models like the tough gaming laptops. The enclosures are quite large and shock mounted to prevent vibration. Responsible for driving these is a Realtek ALC3251 integrated audio chip, which is rated for 1.2 watts per channel into 8 ohm speakers at 1% THD. You may recognize that as not enough power, and while the sound quality from this setup is surprisingly good, the lack of volume is very annoying. The Realtek chip also includes a headphone amplifier which outputs a minuscule 20 milliwatts per channel into 16 ohms, so if you have high impedance or even just low sensitivity headphones, you're going to need an external amp. The included storage is a PCIe 4.0 512GB SSD from Solidigm. This unit uses a Silicon Motion SM2269XTF controller which has no DRAM and a single chip of QLC NAND flash. Yep, that's a cheap and nasty SSD. Peak speeds are decent without being particularly impressive, looking more like a PCIe 3 SSD than the on-paper specs might suggest. There's no slot for a second device, and once again there's a thermal pad mounted to the wrong side of the SSD, which does nothing. Despite Microsoft's attempts to get everyone on board with unifying power modes under the Windows Settings app, the My Asus software still contains separate independent power and cooling profiles. That's a little annoying, but most people will probably be fine with picking one and leaving it there since there's really not much difference between all these modes on a machine like this anyway. These settings are not available in the BIOS, which is very disappointing, so you lose this functionality if you uninstall that software or switch to Linux. On that note, the My Asus package is little more than bloatware. Laptops do not need sprawling utility software like this, and it's nothing more than an attempt for the manufacturer to guide you towards extended warranties and paid services. It's worth pointing out that Asus preloads almost nothing else, so other than Microsoft's own loadout of awful crapware and a small installer stub for McAfee personal security, the factory image is nice and clean. Power draw on the Vivobook Go is, as you'd probably expect, extremely low. At idle, in balanced mode while plugged in, as measured from the power outlet, the machine uses around 7.5 watts, and when running flat out with the CPU fully loaded up, this increases to about 40 watts. The 50 watt-hour battery fitted to this unit is reporting about 48.5 watt-hours after calibrating over a few charge cycles. This will gradually drop with use. So what about battery run times? With the display set to 300 nits and sitting on the Windows desktop, the Vivobook managed 23 freaking hours of runtime. Yes, really. I was just as surprised as you are. Doing my usual heavy internet usage test, which is wildly unscientific, it quit after just 8 hours. Much less impressive, but still good. Charging from empty, the battery takes 50 minutes to hit 50%, 1 hour 24 minutes to hit 80%, and is full after 2 hours and 44 minutes. And when it finally wears out, the battery is extremely easy to replace, being held in by 6 screws and no adhesive. Woohoo! Removal takes about 5 minutes, and replacement part number C31N2024 is readily available for around $80. The processor included here is Intel's misleadingly named and comically tiny Core i3 N305. I'm going to pick on the name for a moment because it's bullshit. When I hear Core i3, I expect we're going to be talking about a small but full-featured current generation CPU with something like 2 to 4 of Intel's fast cores. Instead, this so-called Core i3 has precisely 0 of Intel's high-performance P cores, and swaps in 8 Gracemont E cores instead. Yes, that's what used to be called an Atom. Taking the bait and switch a step further, you'd probably also assume a Core i3 is going to support dual-channel RAM just like every Core i3 in recent memory, but you'd be wrong. The N305 only has support for 1 RAM channel, which nukes what little graphics performance there could have been. RAM supplied with this unit is 8GB of Micron DDR4 3200 memory in the form of 4 16GB chips soldered directly to the board. The integrated GPU is a 32 execution unit variant of Intel's Xe graphics, which despite its small size is going to be noticeably starved by that RAM configuration. Being an architecture that predates Intel's newer Arc-I GPUs, the Xe UHD core does not support mesh shading, ray tracing, or AV1, but still supports most modern graphics APIs and Intel QuickSync. The system tasked with extracting heat from the CPU is hilariously small, being a single squashed heat pipe with a tiny little heat spreader attached to the end, gently wheezed over by probably the thinnest fan I've ever seen. There is no contact between the voltage regulators and the heatsink, and the cold plate surface is far from a mirror finish. Without the fan, the cooler weighs an unbelievably light 20 grams. This low weight translates to an extremely low thermal mass, which means almost no ability to absorb transient heat loads without ramping the fan speed, which means every time this computer thinks about something, you're going to hear about it. Low power laptops like this shouldn't be noisy, but here we are. Now, the Vivobook Go is probably not intended for heavy workloads or gaming, but that doesn't mean we can't be mean to it. Kicking things off, I've subjected it to a 30-minute stress test running Cinebench R23 on a loop while the laptop sits flat on a desk in its highest performance mode. Since there's no GPU, I haven't run a GPU test at the same time, so 100% of the power budget will be aimed at those processor cores. Package power starts off at a sustained 23-ish watts before dropping to around 18 watts and then resetting itself, ultimately drawing a sawtooth pattern like we last saw on the Dell XPS 15. Core temperatures follow the same pattern, never exceeding around 85 degrees. The result is an unstable core frequency starting at 3 GHz and dropping to about 2.6 over time and then back up in a loop. Despite the lack of any cooling, CPU power delivery components all stay nice and cool under a constant load, with the MOSFETs peaking at only 70 degrees. Meanwhile, exterior surface temperatures are variable, with the palm rest, trackpad and left half of the keyboard staying close to ambient at about 22 to 25 degrees, but the upper right hand side of the keyboard peaks at a very noticeable and uncomfortable 40 degrees. Underneath, temperatures follow the same pattern. A peak of 40 degrees is less problematic down here, but it's still unreasonably high given that this machine is only dealing with about 20 watts worth of heat. Now, this should come as no surprise, but performance is pretty dire on this hardware despite those 8 physical CPU cores. Single-core and multi-core CPU test results in benchmarks like Cinebench R23, which simulates a fairly straightforward rendering load, and Geekbench 6 point to a roughly equivalent performance to a quad-core CPU from 2016. BrowserBench's Speedometer 3.0 tells the same story. This computer is barely a third of the performance of a more typical modern system across the board, and that's noticeable even while browsing the web. The end result is that in normal use, this system just feels straight up laggy. Everything feels like it takes just a bit too long. Poking around on a website like YouTube is a great example of this, with unpredictable little pauses and dropped frames while page elements load in. It's the sort of mild lagginess that you can get used to over time, but it's still there, and it's not great having a computer that's working hard just to do one basic task. Now, cranking things up another notch, gaming performance is probably the most abysmal aspect to any of these entry-level systems, and that's certainly the case here. Gaming benchmarks like 3D Mark's Firestrike and TimeSpy are like watching slideshows, and the resultant scores are roughly on par with bad integrated graphics from last decade. As for whether or not you can get some actual games running here, the answer is sort of no, although that depends on your tolerance for low frame rates. Pretty much nothing I'm currently playing runs acceptably on the N305, no matter how far you turn down the graphics or resolution. Dying Light, for example, is a game that runs beautifully with the details cranked on higher powered integrated graphics, but here it barely manages to hold 30 frames per second and the frame times are a complete horror show. So there you have it. Predictably enough, the Vivobook Go is a complete potato with a fairly fragile and floppy plastic build, a loud fan, and extremely low performance. There's a few plus points here, with the display, keyboard, and battery life being unexpectedly good. But the fact of the matter is that lovely OLED display is wasted on this thing unless all you're doing is passively looking at photos or videos, and an LCD would be more appropriate for basic office work or browsing. Overall, I'm rating this one apathetic laptop out of a possible I don't know how this rating system. Basically, it's close to alright, and I don't hate it, but it doesn't make much sense. Right. 1 down, 5 to go. See you again soon. What the fuck? This is the HP 15S, and if infomercials are to be believed, this is America's favourite laptop from America's favourite laptop manufacturer. Lol. This model includes an AMD Ryzen 5500U, 8GB of RAM, and half a terabyte of SSD storage. Anyway, more on all that later. This is a very typical clamshell laptop design with a drop hinge, ports around the sides, and conventional keyboard and trackpad arrangement. In this generic silver, it's not particularly exciting to look at, but you could argue that that's a good thing. An unusual but greatly appreciated design feature is upward firing speakers, although this does come at the expense of kicking the keyboard a little too far forward and squashing the trackpad as a result. The underside of the laptop is very well designed with wide rubber feet and absolutely nothing that can dig annoyingly into your lap. Happy days. Dimensions are decently compact, measuring in pretty much right on average for a 15-inch class machine, and it's pretty lightweight as well, with the tiny power brick barely adding anything to the total weight. Included in the mostly recyclable packaging is the laptop itself, a tiny 45-watt power brick, and a fancy sealed envelope adding a few moments of wholly unnecessary pomp and circumstance to the underwhelming reveal of a small setup guide and warranty information. When new, this laptop arrived with a non-functional webcam and sharp little moulding lines on various edges all around the casing. Dead giveaways of the sort of build quality we're dealing with here. Connectivity is just about standard for this class of laptop, although thankfully this one is not infected with any USB 2.0 ports. Unfortunately, HDMI is still 1.4B, so it can't do 4K at 60Hz. The USB Type-A ports are both mounted to a replaceable daughterboard, so if these broke or wore out, they'd be easy enough to replace. The same goes for the audio mini jack and SD card reader, and even the DC in jack is modular. I do like serviceability, so bonus points for HP here. The all-plastic ClickPad style trackpad is completely fine to use. It tracks fine, the click is fine, and the lack of any rattling or other anomalies is fine too. There's a full-size keyboard sitting above that trackpad. It exists, it has a number pad, and it looks nice. With the positives out of the way, this thing is absolutely horrible to type on. The long travel is wasted on scissor mechanisms that are disconcertingly unstable, there's no backlight, and the key markings are completely invisible in some lighting conditions. It rattles like an absolute bastard doing normal use too, and the rattliness varies depending on where you're pressing the keys. While there is a deliciously shiny metal backplate reinforcing the keyboard deck, the whole assembly is only held in by small, sparse plastic welds in a way that leaves it feeling loose and, well, rattly. Special shout out though to the factory employee or angry robot who decided to take out years of frustration on this plastic sheet. The palm rest is backed by plastic with some efforts made from the top and bottom to reinforce the area with complex mouldings dotting the two plastic assemblies. These do nothing. This laptop is insanely, comically squishy. It's like a big silver marshmallow. Display hinges are wound tight enough that it's not possible to open the lid one-handed, requiring 875 grams or 8.58 newtons of force to lift from fully closed. The display then requires 380 grams or 3.7 newtons to move from a 90-degree angle, but it's very floppy when it's open, which points to at least one structural deficiency somewhere. Predictable? Yes. Disappointing anyway? Yes. Having a look from inside, the brackets in the base unit only distribute the load over a relatively small area, and given how thin and floppy the keyboard deck is, this is not reassuring. Inside the lid, there's actually what kind of looks to be a competent setup. Fairly wide hinges bolt into the bottom of the lid, and long L-shaped metal brackets reach up from there beside the LCD panel and screw into the top of the lid to help spread the load out vertically. But despite HP's efforts to beef things up a little, the incredibly soft materials, use of only 3 screws per side, and loose tolerances all over the place still conspire against a potentially decent design here, and this area looks to be the primary source of that display wobble. It's worth noting that LCD is bonded to the plastic lid with double-sided tape and not the friendly pull tab variety, so you would almost certainly damage the display if you ever needed to replace the lid. Speaking of that display, aside from the barely acceptable 1080p resolution, it's an absolute shit show. Things like contrast ratios, the basic sRGB color gamut, or even just acceptable brightness are concepts yet to be introduced to this display, and being the worst sort of TN LCD panel, viewing angles are so bad that your eyes constantly feel like they're out of phase with each other. It's hard to adequately convey how bad this sort of screen is on camera, but I'm going to assume everybody's encountered one of these before and understands the pain of using it. This is not acceptable at any price, and HP should be ashamed of themselves for fitting this garbage to a more than $700 laptop. They won't though, and they'll probably do it again. Mounted above the display is the usual webcam and stereo microphones. HP doesn't think you deserve a privacy shutter, but since this webcam doesn't work anyway, we'll just assume that it's crap and move on. The sound system installed in this machine is a usual 2-channel, 2-speaker setup, and saints be praised, HP's had the good sense to mount the speakers facing upwards towards you, just under the display. Lovely. Speaker drivers themselves are nice looking little units with 15mm mylar cones and rolled rubber surrounds mounted in reasonably large enclosures. Responsible for driving these is a Realtek ALC 3247 chip, which seems to be predominantly used in HP systems. I was unable to find a datasheet for this one, so rated power output for the headphone and internal speaker amplifiers are anyone's guess, but subjectively, while the audio system has very decent sound quality, the output volume is a little weak through both the internal speakers and the headphone jack. So not bad, not great. The socketed Wi-Fi chip is a pretty crappy Azure Wave dual band unit which only supports the old Wi-Fi AC standard and Bluetooth 5.0. Included storage is an HP-specific Phison 1/2TB PCIe 4 SSD, despite the fact that this laptop only supports PCIe 3. This unit uses a Phison PS5019-E19 controller with no DRAM cache and 2 Toshiba TLC NAND flash chips. Peak read and write speeds are pretty much maxing out that PCIe 3 bus the drive is connected to, so that's something. There's no slot for a second SSD and no cold plate or thermal pad applied to the included drive to assist with heat transfer. Now, HP have sensibly decided to integrate power profiles with Windows, so you might be wondering what exactly this My HP software does once you've managed to tell it to bugger off enough times on the way in. The answer is absolutely nothing. The crapware loadout on this machine is insane. None of it is useful, and quite frankly, if this were my main computer, I'd be nuking that SSD and starting from scratch. I felt like I was constantly being nagged to buy something while using this laptop that I'd already paid for, and that's completely unacceptable, but coming from the company that wants to force everybody to subscribe to a printer, it's nothing new. Power draw on the 15S is very low. At idle, in balanced mode while plugged in, as measured from the power outlet, the machine is drawing around 7.5 watts, and when running flat out with the CPU fully loaded up, this increases to around 31. The 41 watt-hour battery fitted to this unit is still reporting 41 watt-hours of capacity after calibrating over a few charge cycles. That will gradually drop with use, but it's off to a good start. With the display set to its very low maximum brightness and sitting idle on the Windows desktop, the 15S managed an underwhelming 6 hours 53 minutes of runtime, and during my usual heavy internet usage test, which is wildly unscientific, it quit after 4 hours and 50 minutes. Dismal. Charging from empty, the battery takes 37 minutes to hit 50%, 1 hour to hit 80%, and it's full after just over 2 hours. When it finally wears out, that battery is a bit of a bitch to get to, as the 15S hides 6 screws under the rubber feet on the base plate, which is also held on by a large number of very aggressive clips. After that, the battery is held in by 6 screws and uses a very nice fixed socket instead of a ribbon cable to connect to the motherboard. The good-looking little processor forever trapped inside this thing is the misleadingly named Ryzen 5 5500U. I was caught off guard by that name while buying this one and assumed it was a Ryzen 5000 series chip, which would mean Zen 3 architecture. Nope, that's a lie. So thanks very much for that, AMD. In reality, this is an up-branded Zen 2 based Ryzen 5 4600U, and thankfully that's not really the end of the world. This is a 6-core 12-thread part built on TSMC's 7nm process and should be extremely power efficient. The densely packed little VRM arrangement providing power to this chip looks to be a 2+1 phase setup, which suggests a very low wattage. And the integrated GPU here is a Radeon RX Vega 7 with 448 shaders running at a maximum of 1.8 GHz. These Vega iGPUs are starting to to show their age now, but despite only limited support for modern APIs, it's still definitely a highlight of this chip. RAM supplied with this unit is boring old DDR4 3200, in this case a single 8GB SODIMM provided by everybody's favorite brand Ramaxle using Samsung memory modules. This RAM is fully socketed with one free slot enabling you to double it to 16GB and enable dual channel mode. Hallelujah. The system tasked with extracting heat from the SoC is a tiny little single heat pipe setup with a very small fin arrangement, weighing in at only 26 grams without the fan. Less weight means less thermal mass to absorb heat spikes, so this system heavily relies on the fan to dissipate heat even in short workloads. The copper heat spreader has a reasonably smooth finish and is held down with 4 screws for good pressure distribution, but there's no contact for VRM components. Providing airflow is one tiny little fan built by Delta Electronics. Airflow intake is provided both through vents in the bottom case and from above through the keyboard via a surprisingly nicely finished secondary vent. When it does kick up, that fan is reasonably quiet, so while it's constantly there, it's at least not too distracting. Now, laptops in this class are probably not intended for heavy workloads or gaming, but that doesn't mean we can't be a bit mean to it to see what happens. Kicking things off, I've subjected it to a 30-minute stress test running Cinebench R23 on a loop while the laptop sits flat on a desk in its highest performance mode. Since there's no separate GPU, I haven't run a GPU test at the same time, so 100% of the power budget will be aimed at the processor cores. CPU package power starts off boosting to a promising 25 watts, but rapidly deflates to 15, which is the lowest sustained power level I've ever seen in a laptop this big. Core temperatures are unsurprisingly kept well under control despite the barely there cooling system. After a brief spike up to a low 80 degrees, it settles at just over 60 for the rest of the run. Of course, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and the price for the low power and low temperatures is core frequency. The CPU can only hang on to 2.5 GHz even with just the CPU cores themselves fired up, which will drop further if the GPU's loaded at the same time since they dynamically share the same power budget. Given that we're dealing with an extremely low power SoC, you'd probably expect VRM temperatures to remain low, and you'd be right. All of the components stay in the low 50s even after a sustained load. Likewise, as you'd expect, exterior temperatures are kept right under control with generally negligible temperature increases on both the top and bottom. Now, of course, none of this is impressive since a Steam Deck can dissipate 15 watts like it's nothing, and there are no bonus points just for avoiding failure. Interestingly, that aging 6-core Ryzen 5 is capable of outperforming Intel's 8-core i3 N305 while using 3 to 5 watts less power. Now that's certainly something, but it still only positions this chip somewhere around half to a third the current state-of-the-art in low-power CPUs. In fact, it even gets completely smoked in the usual canned benchmarks by Apple's now 4-year-old M1 fitted to a MacBook Air that doesn't even have a fan. Nevertheless, in normal use, this system feels surprisingly snappy and responsive, showing absolutely none of the off-putting lagginess of the i3 N305. If most of the other parts didn't suck, it probably wouldn't be a bad little web browsing machine, but I'd rather stick a fork in my eye than spend any time reading or watching videos on this thing. The integrated Radeon Vega GPU definitely suggests that this machine could handle some gaming, if you actually wanted to, but the actual performance varies enormously depending on RAM configuration. AMD's little old Vega integrated GPUs really do punch above their weight when they're given enough memory bandwidth, so while modern benchmarks still look like slideshows, there's actually a little bit of gaming performance here, with Dying Light almost managing to hit 60 FPS with the second chip installed. Still, don't. Yuck. So then, what do I think of this as an overall system? Straight to the point this time. While upgradability and serviceability are acceptable, the HP 15S skims so severely on two of the most fundamentally important parts, display and keyboard, that using it is an insult to your senses, and hard corners and jagged edges around the palm rest attempt to slice into you during use. Since this laptop has hurt my eyes, skin and feelings, and quality control didn't even extend to checking if the webcam worked at the factory, I'm rating this one the maximum of 5 sad laptops and giving it the inaugural Nuclear Notebook Certified Complete Crap Award. Congratulations. After sitting on the shelf being neglected for almost a year, I'm pleased to finally say this is the Acer Aspire 3, and when I bought this unit it was one of the cheapest laptops on the Australian market at only $498. Not that we're going to go any easier on it just because it was cheap. This particular model includes a 1080p LCD display, Ryzen 3 7320U and 8GB of DDR5 RAM. Design-wise, you're looking at a typical big square slab of a 15.6-inch laptop, clad in silver-painted ABS plastic with contrasting black trim. I quite like the way Acer's current design language extensively uses flat surfaces and sharp creases and angles, but unfortunately it also features one of the stupidest designs in the laptop industry. A pointed drop hinge that hits the surface the laptop's sitting on when it's open beyond about 100 degrees, concentrating the majority of the weight on an obnoxiously sharp edge. This hinge design ostensibly improves ergonomics and airflow on a desk, but in reality, when the display is set to most angles, it lifts the base up so little that it's not really helping at all for either of those purposes, and it only serves to add a ton of discomfort to laptop use and an extra shock load to the hinges every time it bonks the desk. Stop it. Dimensions are on the flabbier side for a basic machine like this, not helped by the unusually thick bezels around the display. Weight is a little higher than usual too, but in this case that's actually a good sign. Included in the very recyclable double-boxed packaging are the laptop itself, a tiny 45-watt power adapter, and once again there's the extra fancy step of opening a sealed envelope to expose a basic setup guide and warranty information. This laptop arrived with no visible manufacturing defects or functional issues, so this one gets full marks for quality control. Connectivity is dead on average for a lower-end laptop. HDMI support is not specified by Acer for some reason, but it does appear to be HDMI 1.4, which doesn't support 4K at 60Hz. Thankfully, this one's free of an infestation of USB 2.0 ports, and the USB-C port supports charging and DisplayPort output. The only ports that are somewhat modular on this machine are the right-hand side USB Type-A and headphone jack, which are both mounted on a separate board, and the DC-in jack, although this one requires the hinge to be unbolted before it can be removed. If any of the other ports on the left-hand side are broken, it's time to get out the soldering iron. Input devices on this laptop are not disgusting. The multi-touch diving board style clickpad fitted here works well. Tracking is reasonably accurate, the button is easy to press over the vast majority of the surface, and clicks are quiet and free of any rattling or phantom double clicks. To keep things feeling nice and firm, the trackpad is backed by a very thick plastic frame, and the entire forward edge of the palm rest is backed with molded in reinforcement structure to stiffen the area as much as possible. Sometimes this isn't successful, but in this case it works. Good stuff. The keyboard is a mostly full-size unit, but with a significantly squashed numpad. This number-pad is so narrow that it's difficult to use from muscle memory, which diminishes the point of it being there in the first place. The rest of the keycaps are all distinctly undersized, and the function key row is absolutely tiny. Nonetheless, the typing experience is one that's completely acceptable. Keys offer minimal feedback and are very light to press, but the keyboard deck feels like it's fixed in place well, and it doesn't noticeably bend or rattle in any way while you're typing. That above-average feeling of solidity is helped by a surprisingly large metal backplate underneath the keyboard, attached to the case by an enormous amount of plastic welds. Of course, this does mean it's close to impossible to replace just the keyboard if it wears out or breaks, but in this case it's a pretty good compromise to get a distinctly solid feeling to the construction. Lastly, I'm pleased to say that Acer have had the good sense to use white print against black keys, so despite the annoying lack of a backlight, the keyboard is still very easy to see in most lighting conditions. Completely failing to pass the YouTuber standard one-hand opening test, the Aspire 3's lid requires a very high 891 grams of force to lift from fully closed, which is enough to bend the entire display like a banana if it's opened from a point in the center. Moving it from 90 degrees requires 338 grams, followed by a spike to 441 when the feet hit the desk and begin lifting the chassis. When the display is being held up by just the hinges, there's a noticeable amount of display wobble, but when it's resting on its stupid little lid feet, that wobble is reduced to almost nothing. So we've found the positive to this otherwise silly design. Now, hinge durability on this one is a little bit interesting. The surface area of the hinge brackets in the lowercase assembly is minimal, and there are disappointingly only 3 screws on each side. However, the screw bosses are all braced by a stiff metal backplate, meaning they'll be less likely to suffer fatigue from stress over time as they're forced to share the load equally. In fact, if you look closely, you'll see that almost all of the screw bosses in this area are braced by this metal plate. This is a very good design, and it's pretty unusual to see this sort of attention to detail in such an otherwise cheaply manufactured machine. Inside the display assembly behind the bezel, things are looking pretty good. In fact, Acer have gone above and beyond here, ticking off every single checkbox for good hinge design in a plastic laptop. 4 screws per side bolt the thick hinge bracket into thick screw bosses, which hook firmly into the bracket via a secondary metal brace, which then extends into full-height L-shaped braces, which are not only bolted into the lid above the display, helping to distribute loads vertically, but which then also run the full width of the display panel. Putting this side by side with, for example, the same area in MSI's GF63, the difference in engineering is night and day. But will it still break? Well, probably. All plastic-framed laptops are likely to suffer from the hinge failures sooner or later, and bashing the lid against the desk all the time like this isn't going to help this one. Throwing a bigger bucket of sewage over Acer's victory parade, the LCD display that's propped up by those nice hinges is another horrible TN panel from the dark ages. Once again, there's no contrast ratio to speak of, it doesn't successfully cover any standard color gamut, and peak brightness might have been impressive in 2006. You should never buy a laptop with a TN panel in this day and age. IPS-type displays are now the bare minimum acceptable standard, and this then is unacceptable. Mounted above the appalling display is an appalling webcam and stereo microphones. You already know exactly what to expect from these, so they don't exactly disappoint. The sound system installed in the Aspire 3 is the usual basic 2-channel, 2-speaker setup firing downwards at the front of the palm rest. Speaker drivers themselves are the totally generic, cheap little oval units that are a plague everywhere from this sort of machine all the way up to high-priced mid-range gaming laptops. The enclosures are fairly small and they aren't screwed or clipped in at all. Instead, they're simply smooshed into place using strips of thin foam tape. Responsible for driving these is a tiny little Realtek ALC 356 chip. No datasheet is readily available for this one, so I was unable to get exact specifications, but subjectively, audio from both the internal speakers and to some extent the headphone output is extremely weak and tinny, and distinctly worse than the category average. The included storage is an M2 2280 form factor 1/4TB Micron SSD. This unit uses a Phison controller equipped with no DRAM cache and a single chip of Micron TLC NAND flash. This drive is definitely small, slow, and unimpressive. No heatsink or thermal pad is provided for the SSD, and there's no slot for a second drive. Wireless connectivity is provided by a socketed Azure Wave chip using a MediaTek chipset which supports AX Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 5.1. Just like HP, Acer seems to have jumped on the bandwagon of handing off power mode controls to the operating system, so the remaining functionality of the Acer Sense software is minimal. Really, there's nothing more useful than battery charge limiting here, and even that is bizarrely gimped into an automatic system instead of a charge stop preset. And on the subject of software, check out the size of the crapware loadout on this one. None of this benefits you, and this is yet another laptop that would benefit from a drive wipe and clean OS install on day one. The 41 Wh battery fitted to this unit is still reporting 41 Wh of capacity after calibrating over a few charge cycles. With the display set to its low maximum brightness and sitting idle on the Windows desktop, the Aspire 3 managed 9 hours and 53 minutes of runtime. During my usual heavy internet usage test, which is wildly unscientific, it quit after 6 hours and 55 minutes. Not bad, not great. Charging from empty, the battery takes 39 minutes to hit 50%, 1 hour 15 minutes to hit 80%, and is full after 1 hour 55 minutes. And when it finally wears out, the battery is extremely easy to replace, too easy in fact. It's held in by only 2 screws at the top, which allows it to flop about quite a bit inside the case. Truly next level cost cutting. Processor included here is the extremely tiny little AMD Ryzen 3 7320U. This microscopic chip is based on the ancient Zen 2 architecture from 2019, but it's made on TSMC's more recent 6nm process and supports modern LPDDR5 memory. The chip is fed by a 2+1 phase power supply, which should be more than enough. RAM supplied with this unit is 8GB of LPDDR5 5500 in the form of a pair of Micron chips soldered permanently to the motherboard in a dual channel configuration. Socketed memory is not supported by this CPU, so it's stuck at 8GB forever, but at least this RAM is reasonably fast. The integrated GPU is AMD's Radeon 610M, which is a tiny little 128 shader unit based on AMD's excellent RDNA 2 architecture. With so few shaders and a fixed maximum clock speed of 1.9 GHz, you shouldn't expect much from this chip, but it does technically fully support DirectX 12 Ultimate, including ray tracing. The system tasked with extracting heat from the CPU is a typical simple arrangement with a single heat pipe wicking heat away from the CPU to a heat spreader, which uses one fan to exhaust heat out the back of the chassis towards the hinge. That single fan is surprisingly large for this class of laptop, but since it only breathes from the vents on the bottom case underneath, it's quite easy to totally block the airflow. Likewise, the heat exchanger is fairly beefy, but on the other end of the heat pipe is an absolutely diminutive little copper cold plate. This is easily the smallest cold plate I've ever seen. Acer didn't waste a cent on this one. The contact surface is very well finished with only a few very shallow visible scuffs and no pitting. VRM components are not contacted at all. Without the fan, the cooler weighs a very low 26 grams. Less weight means less thermal mass or less capacity for the cooler to absorb spikes in heat without ramping up the fan speed. Now, the Aspire 3, like all laptops in its class, is probably not intended for heavy sustained workloads or gaming, but that doesn't mean we can't be mildly abusive to it to see what happens. Kicking things off, I've subjected it to a 30-minute stress test running Cinebench R23 on a loop while the laptop sits flat on a desk in its highest performance mode. Since there's no separate GPU, I haven't run a GPU test at the same time, so 100% of the power budget will be aimed at those processor cores. And would you look at that, an absolutely rock solid and surprisingly high 25 watts is delivered to the CPU throughout the entire test start to finish. Core sensor readouts are kept secret on this machine, so we're using package temperature this time around, but it's just as stable as the power delivery. The cooling system is aiming for 90 degrees and it holds onto it like its life depends on it. Given that we're pumping a whole 25 watts into a tiny little chip, you won't be surprised to learn that core frequencies are held very high, clinging on to the maximum boost of 4.1 GHz the whole time. After a long run at full load, VRM component temperatures are kept nice and low despite the lack of active cooling, with temperatures barely exceeding 60 degrees on the MOSFETs. And likewise, external skin temperatures are kept well under control, barely deviating from ambient temperature for the most part, with only small hot spots on both the top and the bottom reaching over 35 degrees. Now, despite being near the top of the charts here for power consumption, this chip completely fails to translate that power into something resembling high performance. Under load, this machine is pretty much throwing an electronic tantrum and forcefully ejecting all of the power efficiency out of its cot onto the floor where it shatters into a million tiny pieces. Naughty. Nonetheless, it's not too bad for general tasks and even capable of playing back the FL Studio demo track without a single pause or stutter. That's close to all you can expect at this price point, but if you don't load it up too heavily, performance is completely acceptable. As for gaming performance, well, despite the modern GPU architecture, there's only so much you can do with 128 shader cores. In a modern context, yeah, that's close to nothing, and scores in 3DMark's Firestrike and TimeSpy benchmarks are almost impressively low at somewhere around half what the already slow Radeon Vega 7 scores in the same tests. You aren't going to be playing any modern games on this one. On the flip side, in a game from 9 years ago, and yes, Dying Light has accidentally become my default potato gaming benchmark, it's almost surprisingly good, banging out a pretty much playable 30 to 40 FPS, albeit on the lowest possible settings at 720p resolution. That's still bad, but I expected worse. So what have we learned here? Well, coming as a bit of a surprise, the Aspire 3 is not completely horrible. Input devices are entirely usable, build quality is up to an acceptable standard, and durability looks to have been more than just an afterthought in the design of this machine. I could almost imagine this being a tolerable laptop, if not for the presence of that god-awful TN display which does its best to make you hate every second you spend on this thing. In spite of that display though, I'm awarding this one an official Nuclear Notebook rating of less shit than I expected. It could have been worse, but it wasn't. Marking the halfway point in this series checking out the current state of entry-level laptops, today's victim is the MSI Modern 15, which in this configuration includes a 15-inch IPS-like but not IPS for legal reasons 1080p display, AMD Ryzen 5 7530U, and a rather generous 16GB of RAM. Design-wise, you're looking at a big heavy black plastic slab of a 15-inch laptop with ports on the left and right, cooling intake and speaker grills on the bottom, and unfortunately this one is infected with stupid lifty hinge disease, making it extremely uncomfortable for laptop use. Also, the hinge is garbage, but we'll come back to that. Dimensions are sort of enormous given the light-duty sort of machine this is, and it's decidedly heavy for this class of laptop too, weighing in at over 2.2 kilograms including the power brick. I haven't quite found the part that's modern yet, so let me know if you spot it somewhere. Included in the box is a laptop itself, a compact 65-watt power brick, a quick start guide and warranty information, and way too much single-use plastic. Yuck. From new, there weren't too many quality control issues on this one, the most obvious being a hinge that clacks loudly and a Wi-Fi antenna that wasn't seated and stuck on correctly. I fixed this up, but I shouldn't have to be finishing MSI's job for them in one way or another every time. Connectivity is bizarre on this one. There's HDMI 2.1 and a high-speed USB Type-C with power delivery, but a full 2 of the 3 USB Type-A ports are the 20-year-old USB 2.0. What? None of the ports on the left-hand side are modular, but the right-hand side USB Type-A ports and the microSD card reader are all mounted on a replaceable daughterboard, so if you're going to be clumsy and break ports, make it these ones. Input devices are a mixed blessing. Despite being large, accurate, and with a reassuringly positive click mechanism, the trackpad is a total disappointment for one reason. It rattles like an absolute bastard all the time. On the flip side, MSI's backlit keyboard is, as always, absolutely fantastic. Key travel, actuation force, and feedback are all just about perfect. Lighting is even, and the keyboard is very firmly fixed to a solid-feeling palm rest assembly which is totally free of any rattling or excessive give when pressed. The number pad is squished to an annoying extent, which is borderline unforgivable for some people, but the rest of the keyboard is spot on. Helping give the keyboard its very solid feel, inside and underneath we find quite a lot of bracing to stop the cheap soft plastic from feeling too squishy. A metal plate extends over almost the entire underside of the keyboard deck and a solid L-shaped brace runs along the center. It's not the most rigid setup in the world, but it's definitely not bad. The lid requires 809 grams of force to open from fully closed, which is reasonably low given the weight of the laptop, so it's easy to open with one hand. Guess what though? Almost all of that, 700 grams worth, is the weight of the display assembly itself, so what's the hinge doing exactly? Well, you saw the intro, so you can guess how this is going to go. Moving the display from 90 degrees, there's an initial spike to an already low 437 grams when the stupid little lid foot starts elevating the main chassis. From there, hinge resistant takes a dive and fast. From 120 degrees, it takes an alarmingly low 206 gram nudge to move the display, and from 140 degrees, it takes only 107 grams. So from there onwards, a sneeze or a stiff breeze is all it takes for the screen to fall over. Clearly, these hinges are wound up nowhere near as tight as they need to be, and that can only mean one thing, so let's go have a look inside. And predictably enough, there it is. These lower hinge brackets that bolt into the keyboard deck need to be braced as far as possible into the deck area to spread the load they're subjected to out over a wide area. This is far too narrow, and it relies on these pathetic little screw bosses propped up by skinny soft plastic scaffolding, which will rapidly fatigue from the concentrated force applied to them every time you open, adjust, or even just bump the display. That alone is an obvious failure point, and we haven't even looked inside the display assembly yet. Well, stop me if you've seen this before. The skinny and narrow hinge brackets extend no more than 15mm into the lid, do not have full height brackets fixed to or interlocking with them, and are bolted into tiny thin plastic standoffs with small shallow screws. So the answer to why the hinges are so loose is to stop them breaking too quickly. Textbook planned obsolescence. Mounted in that doomed and floppy lid assembly is an almost acceptable but unexciting LCD display. There are a few positives here. Contrast is decent for an LCD, color uniformity is good, and viewing angles are excellent. Unfortunately, maximum brightness is too low, and it doesn't even cover the basic sRGB color gamut, so even web content is presented in a washed out and inaccurate way. 300 nits of brightness and more than 90% of the sRGB gamut are realistically the minimum that you should accept, so while this display gets close on some metrics, it still doesn't quite hit the mark. Mounted above the display is a usual grainy webcam and stereo microphones capable of capturing acceptable quality footage of your ceiling when the lid falls open. The sound system installed in the Modern 15 is the typical arrangement with two stereo speakers firing downward at the sides of the base plate. Speaker drivers themselves are the usual crappy little oval units mounted in reasonably sized and shock-mounted housings, and they are driven by the tiny and basic Realtek ALC256. Audio performance is bleak. It's far too quiet and far too tinny. This is actually the worst internal sound system I've encountered in a long time. The included storage is a Kingston PCIe 4.0 SSD using a single-core Phison controller with no DRAM and 4 chips of Kingston's own TLC NAND flash. Sustained read and write speeds are decent on this one, although once again we've got a PCIe 4 SSD mounted in a system that only supports PCIe 3 speeds. Wireless connectivity is provided by a MediaTek chip which supports dual-band Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.2. MSI have unfortunately not yet integrated power and cooling profiles with the operating system, so you're stuck using MSI Center to adjust power modes. It's worth noting that on this particular machine, the gulf in power delivery between modes is enormous, with the CPU running at 33% higher wattage on high performance than it does on balanced. Battery charging is also configurable in MSI Center with a pretty good array of different settings to choose from. Other than MSI Center, there's basically no crapware pre-installed on this one. MSI used to be the worst for software bloat, and now they're one of the best. At idle, in balanced mode, while plugged in, as measured from the power outlet, the machine uses around 10 watts of power, and when running flat out with the CPU fully loaded up in high performance mode, this increases to about 50 watts. Extremely heavy power consumption for the performance level, that's for sure, but it's still low in the grand scheme of things. The 38 watt hour battery fitted to this unit is reporting around 36.5 watt hours after calibrating over a few charge cycles. This will gradually drop with use. With the display set to its low maximum brightness and sitting idle on the Windows desktop, the Modern 15 managed a very low 6 hours and 9 minutes of runtime. During my usual heavy internet test, it quit after only 4.5 hours. Impressively unimpressive. Charging from empty, the battery takes 41 minutes to hit 50%, 1 hour 13 minutes to hit 80%, and it's full after 2 hours and 8 minutes. When it does finally wear out, that battery is reasonably easy to replace. Aggressive and fragile plastic clips and one factory seal sticker anyway, but after that it's only held in with 4 screws and no adhesive. The very good-looking processor included here is AMD's Ryzen 5 7530U. Joining the current trend of misleadingly named chips, this CPU is most similar to the old Ryzen 5 5600U, being manufactured on TSMC's older 7nm process and based on Zen 3 architecture. Power is provided by a very neatly arranged VRM. In fact, have you noticed something? Everything on this board is neatly arranged. It's kind of beautiful. Forming part of the visually appealing board topology is the unfortunately soldered-on system memory. Mounted to both sides of the board are 2 channels of 4 Samsung DDR4 3200 memory modules. 16GB of RAM is more than enough for this sort of processor, so while it sucks that MSI have resorted to soldered RAM, it's not the end of the world. The integrated GPU is the very familiar and rapidly aging Radeon RX Vega 7. This GPU pales in comparison with modern high-performance integrated graphics, but it's still supported by AMD's Adrenalin drivers and does have basic support for DirectX 12. The system tasked with extracting heat from the CPU is quite a bit beefier than the setups in the other low-end laptops we've looked at recently, but it's fundamentally still a one fan, one heatsink arrangement, breathing entirely from the bottom of the laptop and exhausting through the hinge. Well, trying to. The exhaust outlet is smashed right up against the lower display bezel, severely restricting airflow. There is a way to do this well, but this isn't it. A very large copper cold plate extends out to cover all VRM components and uses 4 screws to ensure even contact pressure. The CPU die contact patch shows some very light machining marks, but it's generally free of any factory-induced scuffs or pitting. Without the fan, the cooler weighs 48 grams. More weight means more thermal mass, which means less reliance on the fans to dissipate small spikes in heat from brief workloads, at least in theory. In the Modern 15's case, the fan gets rowdy annoyingly often, seemingly every time the CPU kicks up to full power, even for a moment. Overall noise emissions are similar to a cheaper gaming laptop, but with none of the accompanying performance. As always, we'll need to be mildly abusive to that cooling system to find out what it can handle. Kicking things off, I've subjected it to a 30-minute stress test running Cinebench R23 on a loop while the laptop sits flat on a desk in its highest performance mode. Since there's no separate GPU, I haven't run a GPU test at the same time, so 100% of the power budget will be aimed at those processor cores. Package power starts off blasting up to nearly 50 watts before dropping to and maintaining 30 for the remainder of the test. Core temperatures gradually waft upward for a while before stabilizing at a completely reasonable but completely arbitrary 87 degrees. All perfectly under control in these conditions, but I suspect that there's not too much overhead in this cooler to cope with a hot day. 30 watts is quite generous for this CPU, so all 6 cores hold on to about 3.5 GHz for the duration of this test. That's not too bad for a 6-core chip. Unfortunately, the waste heat this laptop generates under this sort of load is not handled in an acceptable manner. Skin temperatures are absolutely appalling on this one, with the keyboard sailing well into the mid-40s over a very wide area above the back of the motherboard. Things are no better on the bottom case, with the plastics hitting as high as 60 degrees. This is a clear sign that the cooler is managing to get heat off the CPU die, but not managing to get it out of the case. In short, the exhaust vent design is exactly as bad as it looks. With all this power consumption and heat comes completely unimpressive, if still adequate, performance. Despite being given a black eye by Fanless Fruit Company produce from 4 years ago, this one is at least the fastest of this batch of low-end machines, and by a huge margin in most cases. You won't be surprised at all to learn that in normal general use, this laptop is always fast enough and never feels overworked. Heavy multitasking with office and even music production software is absolutely no problem, and you'd only really start running into issues with software that's reliant on high GPU performance. It would be really nice if that fan would shut up though. Now, since we've got something resembling a usable amount of Vega compute units and something resembling a usable amount of RAM, you'd certainly be forgiven for expecting to be able to do at least some sort of gaming on this thing. Predictably enough, modern gaming benchmarks like 3D Mark's Firestrike and TimeSpy look like absolute slideshows, but that Vega 7 still turns in some pretty good scores by the standards of integrated graphics. Dialing our expectations down a significant amount, the Modern 15 easily keeps the almost 10-year-old Dying Light above 60 FPS almost non-stop. Hallelujah. Mind you, that is with the graphics settings dropped all the way down and at 720p resolution. Still, hooray. This motivated me to try something newer, but unfortunately in catgame.exe, with the graphics similarly dropped all the way down and the resolution set to 720p, things are getting a bit ropey. In outdoor areas, it struggles to keep the frame rate above 30, but since it does for the most part, I'd still call this game just about playable. In short though, if you're sticking to older or less graphically challenging games and have some tolerance for the odd low frame rate, the Vega 7 still has a bit of life left in it. The laptop itself though, no. Suffering through the floppy hinge, bad speakers, fan noise, and the high skin temperatures just to play games at this level of performance is nothing short of masochism. Overall, it should come as no surprise that despite relatively good performance and an excellent keyboard, I won't be recommending this laptop to anybody. Design compromises are rampant in this one, but I won't even dwell on the bad thermal management, sloppy trackpad, or poor audio. It's that hinge that completely writes this off as an acceptable product. Given the seemingly engineered-in expiry date on the most important structural components, I'm giving this one an official rating of Nuclear Notebook certified time bomb, and we are leaving yet another MSI laptop review on a sour note. Boo. It's always interesting to see where a manufacturer draws the line for an acceptable computer in any given year, and as demonstrated by today's victim, Dell's standards are currently pretty damn low. This is their bottom-end Inspiron 153520, and this one's comes straddled with a dual-core CPU, a tiny SSD, horrible TN screen with a resolution from the mid-2000s, and potentially a class-action lawsuit. Anyway, more on all that later. Design-wise, you're looking at a completely generic and soulless 15-inch laptop with a stupid lifty hinge design, ports on the left and right, and acres of the cheapest kind of dull grey plastic. Seriously, look at it. It's so drab and miserable. Thankfully, the basic design is reasonably sane, other than the annoying lifty hinge, and there's no sharp edges or knee-murdering protrusions to speak of. Dimensions are fairly standard for a device in this class, and weight is totally acceptable with the tiny charging brick adding almost nothing. Included in the fully recyclable packaging is the usual, the laptop itself, minuscule 65-watt charger, and a small amount of documentation. It's worth pointing out that Dell made the initial unboxing of this machine particularly nice, with a very well laid out initial presentation and a silly little welcome card. Fit and finish on this machine is genuinely awful. It seriously could not feel more cheap, but there were no noticeable assembly or cosmetic faults on this one out of the box. Connectivity is typical for machines in this class with the bare minimum of everything. Once again, we've got the now vintage USB 2.0 and HDMI 1.4 on board. All ports on the right hand side, the audio I/O jack, USB 2.0 and the SD card reader are mounted on a replaceable daughter board. But other than the DC in jack, all the ports on the left are soldered on. Still technically replaceable, but far from modular. Dell's trackpads are usually what you could call vaguely acceptable, and this one makes no exception. It's not particularly nice to use, and the integrated button feels extremely fragile and inconsistent over the clickable tracking surface, but it works and it's reasonably accurate. The trackpad is designed to rest directly against the battery to give it a little bit of extra solidity, and that's a benefit the keyboard has not been blessed with. That keyboard is a full-size unit with a number pad. It's not backlit, and the keycaps are so low contrast that they completely disappear under all sorts of completely normal lighting conditions. The flimsy little keys have extremely short and unstable travel, and the leading edge of the palm rest is too sharp. Wonderful. As usual, the keyboard is difficult to replace since it's plastic welded into the top case, and it's backed with a wafer-thin strip of aluminium. This thin token effort at reinforcement does absolutely nothing. The entire structure of the top case is as floppy as a piece of paper, even with the motherboard and cooling components still installed. The Inspiron isn't winning any points here, so let's just move on. In their infinite wisdom, Dell's engineers have decided to crank the hinge resistance up to an absolutely insane level on this one. The display lid requires a peak of 1042 grams of force to lift from fully closed, with the lid bending like a banana in the process, and then 470 grams to move in either direction from a 90-degree angle. The lid then continues to need more than 320 grams of force to move all the way to the end of its travel, which relative to the machine's weight is tight enough that the base of the laptop will lift up completely from any angle. Well, you'd certainly hope that the structure is pretty beefy on the inside, or this is just asking for trouble. Prepare for disappointment. Inside the base of the machine, the basic structure is looking just about alright. The hinge brackets extend a reasonable, if asymmetric, distance into the keyboard deck area, which looks to be a minimal effort to spread the mechanical load out over a larger area. 2 out of the 3 screw bosses on each side are a solid part of the metal reinforcement plate, minimizing the amount of stress taken directly by soft plastics. That's good, and it should be enough to prevent this area from fatiguing and tearing apart. So, no major crimes down here. Let's keep looking. Underneath the display bezel, where the hinges bolt directly to the lid, wow. Those are unbelievably tiny 3 by 1.5 centimeter plates bolting into 3 tiny screw bosses that are themselves squished into tiny weak plastic housings. Just to recap, we have a record-settingly stiff hinge with record-settingly small attachment points to the soft and weak plastic lid. Congratulations, Dell, this is officially the crappiest hinge design we've ever seen on this channel. Unfortunately, we already know for a fact that these things fail fast, way too fast. Owners are in large numbers having to have these replaced within the first couple of years of the machine's life, and it's easy to see why. Once it's broken, if there's no warranty left and no extended service program, you're faced with the prospect of spending a couple of $100 repairing a completely mediocre laptop that only cost a couple of $100 in the first place, knowing it's only going to break again anyway. More often than not, customers will not proceed with that repair and the laptop becomes e-waste. Just like MSI, Dell are potentially facing at least one class action lawsuit over their intentionally defective hinge designs, and in this case there's one specific to this exact model. In the provided photos on this legal firm's website, you can actually see how the hinges let go at the exact spot you'd expect them to. Low-cost laptops aren't always quite this bad, but Dell's design is objectively garbage. Speaking of garbage, the display temporarily held up by that crappy hinge is spectacularly bad. You might not have realized it, but there's at least one factory somewhere that's still cranking out 1366 by 768 TN LCD displays, which on a 15-inch panel gives you a pixel density of only 100 pixels per inch. Unfortunately, things just get worse from there. Out of the box, there's an intense blue cast, and after calibrating this out, the maximum brightness plumbers from an already pathetic 244 nits to a completely woeful 211. Contrast is an unbelievably low 314:1, and a full 38% of the basic sRGB color gamut remains unaccounted for. Color rendering is hopeless, and even UI elements like the Windows settings app show ugly and distracting graininess. To put this into simple terms, this display is disgusting, and even 20 years ago it would have been a disappointment. Adding insult to injury, the panel fitted to my brand new unit shows clusters of bright pixels in all of the corners, and it's extremely distractingly prone to distortions from pressure applied to the lid. And above that awful screen is an awful webcam. Dell's website humorously describes this as camera plastic. Audio is provided by a tiny little Realtek ALC3204, and predictably enough, sound is completely acceptable through the headphone jack and kind of awful through the speakers. The internal sound system is a very basic 2-channel setup rated for 2 watts per channel, with the usual crappy little oval speaker drivers mounted in surprisingly large boxes. But while at first glance it looks like these are shock mounted, they're actually attached so loosely that they can easily rattle around in the chassis. I think the engineers got bored about halfway through designing this system. Included storage is a WD SN740 SSD mounted in an extremely bizarre way to the board using a 2280 size stamp metal bracket that simply smushes the actual 2230 SSD into the board and asks it very nicely not to move. Fascinating. As it turns out, this impostor of a WD SSD is in fact a SanDisk unit in disguise using both a SanDisk controller and SanDisk NAND flash. Read and write speeds are just about 50% of the maximum speeds of an old PCIe 3 SSD, so this drive is not particularly impressive, but those speeds are more than adequate for general usage. As is fairly typical for these low-end machines, there's no slot for a second drive despite plenty of unused space in the chassis. Wireless connectivity is provided by a Realtek chipset which only supports Wi-Fi AC and Bluetooth 5.0. Both antennas are located in the lid and I've had no issues with reception or connectivity. Pre-installed software bloat on this one isn't great, mostly because it results in a full 72% of the system RAM being full immediately after a cold boot, and that doesn't include any app caching. I would suggest immediately uninstalling all of the Dell and McAfee software, but I predict that you won't be buying this laptop anyway, so that doesn't matter. Speaking of that Dell software, the only thing you might find even mildly useful is the My Dell app. If you have the patience to wait and wait and wait for it to load, this eventually acts as a central hub for power, display, and audio modes. If we're being completely honest, the audio and display settings are completely and utterly pointless because neither the hopeless LCD or garbage tier speaker system is salvageable with any amount of software tweaking, so you're better off just leaving these alone. The power section is more interesting. You've got highly detailed battery charging settings with 4 automatic modes and an interesting adjustable slider with both a start and stop limit on the battery, so you can keep it within a very precise range. I'm not personally into this level of micromanagement, but it's very cool to see. Underneath are 4 thermal management modes, all rather amusingly named since no matter what mode you choose, this computer has no choice but to remain cool and low performance. Overall power draw on the Inspiron 15 is very low. At idle in balanced mode while plugged in, as measured from the power outlet, the machine uses around 5.5 watts, and when running flat out with the CPU fully loaded up, this increases to around 32 watts. The 41 watt-hour battery fitted to this unit is reporting exactly 41 watt-hours after calibrating over a few charge cycles. This will gradually drop with use, but it's off to a good start. With the display set to the very low maximum brightness and sitting idle on the Windows desktop, the Inspiron managed 12 hours and 36 minutes of runtime. Doing my usual heavy internet usage test, which is of course wildly unscientific, it quit after 6 hours and 56 minutes. Charging from empty, the battery takes 57 minutes to hit 50%, 1 hour 32 minutes to hit 80%, and it's full after 2 hours and 11 minutes. When it finally wears out, the battery is relatively easy to replace, being held in by 3 screws and no adhesive. The good looking and absolutely tiny processor included here is AMD's Athlon Gold 7220U. Built on TSMC's 6nm process, the 7220U is a dual-core chip based on AMD's aging Zen 2 architecture with SMT enabled on both cores and support for 2 channels of LPDDR5 memory. TDP is rated at 15 watts and the maximum boost clock speed is 3.7 GHz. Power is provided by a suitably light-duty 2+1 phase power supply arranged in a surprisingly spread out way on the board. RAM supplied with this unit is a pair of 4GB Micron LPDDR5 5500 chips soldered straight onto the board. Soldered RAM is pretty much compulsory with these low-power AMD Mendocino chips, and what's fitted here is both big enough and fast enough, but it sure doesn't do anything to improve the appeal of this machine. Lastly, the integrated GPU is AMD's tiny little Radeon 610M. Approximately 1/40th of a Radeon 6900 XT, this little iGPU is DirectX 12 Ultimate compliant, but don't set your expectations too high. The system tasked with extracting heat from the SoC is a very predictable single fan, single heat pipe setup, breathing air from the vents underneath and out through the hinge via a 3.5 CFM fan made by Delta Electronics. Cold plate surface is finished surprisingly well with almost no visible pitting or other defects. Without the fan, the cooler weighs an incredibly low 19 grams, which means there's almost no thermal mass to absorb transient heat loads without kicking up the fan speed. Either because of how floppy the shell is, or due to sloppy designing the fan, you can actually hear the blades grinding against something when you move the laptop around while it's running. It's kind of fun. If the dual-core CPU and 128 shader GPU didn't give it away, this laptop isn't really intended for heavy workloads, so of course we've gone ahead and subjected it to a heavy workload just to see what happens. Because there are only 2 low-power cores here and we want to fully load up the power delivery and cooling, I've run Cinebench to stress the CPU cores and MSI Combustor to stress the integrated GPU simultaneously for a full 30 minutes, with the laptop sitting flat on the desk in its highest performance power mode. Predictably enough, even with the SoC fully utilized, power consumption remains fairly low on this one. There's no short-term higher boost level, so at full load, the overall package power just barely nudges into 20 watts. As far as temperatures go, well, in the high performance mode, Dell have set the fan to severely overreact to temperature increases, so instead of stabilizing the temperature early on, it gradually creeps up for around 20 minutes before maxing out at an unnecessarily low 68 degrees. Predictably enough, the CPU core frequencies, all 2 of them, stay pegged at the maximum rated clock of 3700 MHz pretty much indefinitely. It's hard to fault the power and cooling systems of this laptop since they keep the little AMD SoC running fully at its rated speeds under load, and that's easily the most positive positive thing I have to say about this system, or rather the only positive thing. So what exactly does that 20 watts get you in the way of performance? Well, I hope you're not expecting too much. CPU performance is incredibly low on these Athlons, to the point where I highly doubt you're going to find anything less powerful on the market. Scores for both single and multi-threaded tests in both Geekbench 6 and Cinebench R23 are comically tiny and absolutely trail the rest of these lower-end chips, even Intel's Atom-based M305. This is definitely a single tasking only laptop, and a pretty mediocre one at that. Even basic web browsing performance is woeful, with BrowserBench's Speedometer 6 clocking in at less than half of what would be considered an average score these days. Nonetheless, 8GB of reasonably fast memory and the decent enough solid-state drive help prop this machine up to a state of borderline adequacy in normal use. Navigating around the OS, browsing the web, replying to emails are all well within the capabilities of this one without testing your patience too severely, and impressively enough, it can even run the FL Studio demo songs without a hitch. Now, given the architectural similarities between these AMD Mendocino chips and the little powerhouse of an SoC inside Valve's Steam Deck, you'd be forgiven for thinking that some gaming might be on the table with this one. Well, 3D Mark's Firestrike and TimeSpy benchmarks are a pretty clear indication that you're not going to be loading up any modern AAA titles, despite that tiny GPU's technical compatibility with DirectX 12 Ultimate. Dropping things back a decade, 2015's Dying Light actually runs surprisingly well on the 7220U, and with the graphics set to the lowest settings and resolution dropped to 1280 by 720, it can actually just about cling onto a playable frame rate most of the time. Still, as with most of these garbage tier machines, you're not actually going to want to do any gaming on here. The awful display, audio, and input devices all conspire to make your gaming experience completely and utterly miserable. So, to recap, Dell's Inspiron 15 offers a hopeless mixture of poor quality, fragile build, ugly looks, a horrible keyboard, dreadful screen, bad speakers, and in this configuration, it caps it all off with extremely low performance. You won't be surprised to see this machine being graded as complete crap, and since a better chip and display wouldn't even come close to salvaging this train wreck, I would strongly suggest that nobody buys this product or any of its higher end siblings. Right, 5 down, 1 to go, and we've saved the worst till last. See you next time. Somewhere in the mid-2000s, PC laptop manufacturers got caught up in a seemingly never-ending race to the bottom, relentlessly finding compromise after compromise to drive down costs with absolutely no regard given to the quality, durability, or user experience of their devices. Today's insufferable relic from that era is Lenovo's IdeaPad Slim 1 in the second cheapest configuration currently available for sale in Australia. That means we've been blessed with a dual-core CPU, 4GB of memory, just over 100GB of storage, and yet another god-awful display. Do you remember when I said currently available? Yeah, you can buy this machine right now, brand new, running Windows 11. Clearly, Lenovo seems to think this adds up to a usable laptop PC, so we'll take their word for it and press on. As long as you don't look too closely, the IdeaPad 1 does a good job of looking like a perfectly normal, perfectly decent Lenovo laptop. The basic design is completely sane and inoffensive. There's a sensible hinge that doesn't dig into your legs, wide and comfortable palm rests, and not a single sharp edge or poorly placed dagger underneath. None of this stands up to close scrutiny. The rough plastics used here are all distinctively low grade, with the case panel on the bottom being so brittle that, unnoticed by me, one of the screw standoffs simply fell apart when the laptop was opened, allowing the associated screw to go back in further than it should have on reassembly, leading to this. There, I've mentioned the bump, now we can all do our best not to look at it for the rest of the video. While we're picking on the plastics, get a load of the molding quality of this USB logo. Very impressive. Included in the fully recyclable packaging is the usual, the laptop itself, a 65-watt power brick, and a small amount of printed documentation including the standard Lenovo money grab and a very brief explanation of Windows S mode. Connectivity is fairly predictable on these low-end machines and there's nothing surprising here. Disappointing inclusions are HDMI 1.4, which only supports 4K at 30Hz, and an entire USB Type-A port is wasted on the archaic USB 2.0. Once again, there's also an SD card slot, and I'm convinced that none of these companies actually knows why they're putting these in. Bizarrely, Lenovo uses a full-sized SD reader in their low-end machines, swaps to a useless micro SD slot in the mid-range IdeaPad 5, and then goes back to full-sized SD again in the IdeaPad Pro. What? Realistically, almost none of these ports are replaceable, although the SD card and USB 2.0 port are on their own daughter board. This is a common but disappointing serviceability failure. While it's incredibly basic, the trackpad on the IdeaPad 1 isn't too bad. It doesn't rattle, tracking is reasonably accurate, and the integrated button is reasonably easy to activate from anywhere on the lower third of the tracking surface. Basically, this pointing device isn't actively annoying, and sometimes that's the best you can hope for. Above the trackpad is what looks an awful lot like one of Lenovo's excellent keyboards. Unfortunately, as with most parts of this machine, that's just for show. This non-backlit keyboard has almost no travel, absolutely no feedback when keys are activated, and the keycaps are extremely unstable. The positioning of the key bed slightly too deep within the top case combines with the instability of the keys to cause your fingertips to constantly bump against the frame between the keys while typing, which is a novel and extremely annoying experience. Unsurprisingly, there's only an extremely thin sheet of aluminium underneath the keyboard deck, and that does almost nothing to stop the top case caving in like crazy where keys are pressed. The keycaps are unpleasantly rough, and there's an annoying chorus of rattles constantly emanating from inside while you're typing. I really have nothing positive to say here. The IdeaPad 1's very floppy hinge requires 820 grams of force to lift from fully closed, and then 291 grams to move in either direction from a 90-degree angle. Despite the reasonably low lifting force, it's still impossible to open this one with one hand. While the lid will happily open to around 170 degrees, the hinge smashes onto the desk and grinds along for the final third of its travel. Lovely. Under the keyboard deck, small hinge brackets bolt with only 3 screws per side directly into fragile plastic standoffs with only the tiniest, thinnest piece of aluminium bracing, attempting to add some structural integrity to this mess. Inside the display lid, things are even worse. The hinge brackets are absolutely tiny, which concentrates the force over a ridiculously small area, and only 3 tiny screws bolt straight into the brittle plastic lid with no secondary reinforcement of the screw bosses nor any form of brackets running to the top of the lid. In summary, Lenovo have not made even the slightest attempt to stop this laptop ripping apart within the first couple of years of normal careful use. Thanks, Lenovo. The display panel itself is arguably even crappier than the plastic holding it up. This particularly awful TN panel has a resolution of only 1366 by 768 and a maximum brightness of 250 nits. Contrast measures in at a catastrophically low 250:1, and nearly 43% of the basic sRGB color gamut is left unaccounted for. Viewing angles are so narrow that the image is never really stable, and blacks are best described as a sort of splotchy blue. There's even fun little pressure distortions constantly rippling around the lower bezel as the display wobbles during use. You know what? Maybe it's not so bad if the screen does fall off. Mounted above the awful display is the typical awful webcam and pair of stereo microphones. Thankfully, you can prevent the government from watching you by closing the convenient privacy cover. Onboard audio in this class of machine is extremely predictable, so you won't be surprised to see the usual pair of cheap little stereo speakers firing downwards through the bottom case. Powering these and doing general audio duty is a Realtek ALC3287 chip, and audio I/O is provided by a basic combination headphone and microphone jack. Storage is an absolutely tiny 128GB Samsung PM991A SSD. This 2230 size drive is mounted in a particularly nicely made 2280 adapter to the single M2 slot on the motherboard. Read and write speeds are extremely low for an NVMe drive, but still far better than the hopeless eMMC drive you'll sometimes find on this class of laptop, and frankly we're lucky machines of this caliber are no longer shipping with mechanical hard drives. Wireless connectivity is provided by a Realtek RTL8852BE chip supporting the older Wi-Fi 6 standard. The Wi-Fi performance is probably fine, but it's extremely bloody hard to tell when the system is as slow as this one. Pre-installed software bloat is pretty bad on this machine, although it's getting increasingly difficult to tell what's manufacturer bloatware and what's just Windows. Nonetheless, there's far too much crap installed here, and between the adware that is Lenovo Vantage and the malware that is McAfee Internet Security and Windows 11 itself, resource usage from a cold boot is insane, and the constant nags to buy something are unbelievably annoying. Thanks, Lenovo. Speaking of Lenovo Vantage, in theory there are probably useful performance, thermal, and charging modes in here. Bear with me for a moment here. You know what, let's just move on to something else. The 42 watt-hour battery fitted to this unit is reporting exactly 41.8 watt-hours after calibrating over a few charge cycles. This will gradually drop with use. With the display set to the very low maximum brightness and sitting idle on the Windows desktop, the IdeaPad 1 managed 13 hours and 11 minutes of runtime. During my usual heavy internet usage test, which was particularly tedious on this one, it quit after 6 hours and 54 minutes. Charging from empty, the battery takes 40 minutes to hit 50%, 1 hour 11 minutes to hit 80%, and it's full after 1 hour and 51 minutes. When it finally wears out, that battery is reasonably easy to replace, being held in by 5 screws and no adhesive. The impressively unimpressive SoC in this configuration is AMD's Athlon Silver 7120U. Built on TSMC's 6nm process and using the aging Zen 2 microarchitecture, this 2-core, 2-thread chip is the most cut-down member of the Mendocino family and realistically has no business existing in a modern PC. TDP is rated at 15 watts and the 2 cores have a maximum turbo speed of 3.5 GHz and share a total of 3 MB of cache. Snuggled up to the CPU is AMD's Radeon 610M, which is based on the aging but excellent RDNA 2 architecture. These little iGPUs are blessed with full support for modern graphics APIs, but with only 128 shaders and very little RAM to share as video memory, it's certainly not going to be up for any heavy workloads. Powering the SoC is a predictably tiny 2-phase VRM. It's not actively cooled, nor does it need to be. Now, as distractingly bad as that dual-core processor is, don't forget that this machine is also stuck with only 4GB of RAM. Yes, stuck with it. That memory is soldered directly to the motherboard and there's no slot for expansion, dooming the laptop to a very short and useless life. Thanks, Lenovo. The system tasked with extracting heat from the SoC is the usual little single fan, single heat pipe setup with air intake at the bottom and exhausting from behind the display hinge. The little 45mm fan is easy to remove for cleaning and reasonably quiet under heavy loads. The cold plate surface is a bit messy with quite a bit of visible scuffing and it's only held on by 3 screws where you'd ideally like to see 4 for better pressure distribution. Without the fan, the cooler weighs only 28 grams. Less weight means less thermal mass, which means you will hear the fans kick on more frequently to deal with the heat from short workloads. Now, if the dual-core CPU and microscopic GPU didn't give it away, this laptop isn't really intended for heavy workloads, so of course we've gone ahead and subjected it to an extended heavy workload just to see what happens. Because there are only 2 low-power cores here and we want to fully load up the power delivery and cooling, I've run Cinebench R24 to stress the CPU cores and MSI Combustor to stress the integrated GPUs simultaneously for a full 30 minutes, with the laptop sitting flat on the desk in its highest performance mode. With the SoC fully utilized, package power sits indefinitely at 17 watts, just slightly above the chip's rated TDP. There's no short-term raised boost level, so at full load, the CPU core frequency spends the entire time pegged at its maximum clock speed of 3500 MHz, and at the same time, the little Radeon iGPU happily sits at its maximum speed of 1900 MHz with only the tiniest little deviation every now and then. With only 17 watts to dissipate, the little cooling system has no problem keeping temperatures under control, with the CPU cores slowly creeping up to 70 degrees and then staying there. As for performance, well, anyone who's seen the previous videos in this series has already seen this. The 7120U with only 4 gigs of RAM absolutely embarrasses itself in any benchmark compared to other low-end chips. Other than that Core Ultra 7, all the other CPUs here use very similar amounts of power while running these tests, so even the efficiency is pretty poor on this one. BrowserBench's Speedometer 3 web browsing benchmark has the Athlon at less than 1/6 the performance of an Apple M3, and that is a very accurate reflection of the experience of normal use on this machine. If you're wondering what gaming would look like on this one, please enjoy 3DMark's Firestrike at 3 frames per second. And here's the few seconds I spent testing out 2015's Dying Light at 720p with all graphics settings on low or off. No gaming. So to recap, the IdeaPad 1 is a fragile and poorly built machine with an obnoxiously poor keyboard and bad screen. In this configuration, it's crippled further by an inadequate processor and insufficient non-upgradable memory while being saddled with a bloatware-ridden factory image of Windows 11. Literal textbook e-waste from new, right out of the box. This is a completely unacceptable product and it's earned itself an official rating of complete crap and a strong recommendation to avoid this and all other models of IdeaPad 1. Over the last 6 videos, I think we've pretty clearly shown why you should not buy entry-level laptops from any manufacturer, but that doesn't actually mean you need to spend more to get a good machine with a long warranty. We'll be exploring a better alternative in great detail in the near future. But until then, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Since we've spent the last 6 videos explaining why you should not buy a cheap entry-level laptop from any manufacturer, it's only appropriate that we have a look at a better alternative for people who either can't or don't want to move up to another price bracket. So with that in mind, today's victim is a 2019-era Lenovo ThinkPad T590 in a fairly luxurious configuration for what it is. This one is equipped with a Core i7-8665U, 16GB of memory, a 1080p IPS touchscreen, and would you believe it, 4G mobile connectivity. Wow. In Australia, you can easily find these laptops for around $400, including a 1-year warranty, making them an identically priced drop-in alternative to something like Lenovo's awful IdeaPad Slim 1, which thoroughly embarrassed itself in our last review. So for this video, we're going to review the T590 as normal, but keep a running tally of advantages over that IdeaPad as we go. The design of Lenovo's T-Series has always been completely sane and sensible, being a big black slab of a 15-inch laptop with a drop hinge at the rear, ports on the left and right, and a smooth surface underneath, making it comfortable to use on your lap. Fit and finish on these was always what you'd politely call industrial, but it holds up pretty well over time as long as the machine's been treated with care. Even with a few years worth of knocks and scuffs, this laptop feels solid and purposeful, with the soft touch coating adding some warmth and friendliness. That is a stark contrast to the cheap, rough-edged plastic of the IdeaPad, so we're kicking things off with 1 point to Team ThinkPad. Connectivity on a machine of this age can be hit or miss, but thankfully the T590 comes with a full set of ports, including 2 full-featured USB Type-Cs with DisplayPort and Thunderbolt 3, and even an RJ45 Ethernet jack. Unfortunately, other than a single USB-A port and the Ethernet jack, all the other ports on this machine are soldered on, so if and when you wear any of these out, it's going to require either a full logic board change or a very careful repair involving a soldering iron and questionable longevity. Despite that serviceability failure, connectivity is a clear win for the ThinkPad. The display takes a whopping 1.26 kilograms of force to open from fully closed, and then 462 grams to move in either direction from a 90-degree angle. Those are remarkably high numbers, and while this could be affected somewhat by the hinges stiffening up with age, the action is still extremely smooth and quiet. With such a large amount of force being transmitted through the structure, you'd certainly hope it's solid enough to cope with it, so let's have a look inside. With all the bits out of the way, you're immediately presented with a massive plate of molded magnesium spanning the entire top case. This plate acts as a solid backbone for the laptop, with all major components bolting directly into molded-in standoffs. Hinge brackets are directly attached via reinforced screw bosses at 3 points on both sides. This is an ideal setup for durability, and any laptop that's genuinely worth your time will look like this on the inside. Unfortunately, of course, most don't. Things seem to unravel slightly inside the lid behind the display bezel, where it's immediately obvious that we've got the suboptimal arrangement of screw bosses sunken into thin plastic standoffs. That's not great, but remember this is reinforced plastic and not the usual ABS rubbish. And there's also a metal reinforcement bracket running the height of the display. Taking a look at the hinge assembly in isolation, this is a fascinating fully molded design that looks like it would help to spread certain loads out over the large area making direct contact, minimizing forces taken directly by the screw standoffs, particularly when the lid's opened. T590s have proven to be very durable in the field, so while this setup looks marginal, good material choices and engineering mean it does hold up, so we're giving this a pass and awarding the ThinkPad yet another point. Propped up by that decent enough set of hardware is a 15.6-inch IPS type display. Predictably enough, this panel is nothing impressive at all, with only the contrast ratio turning in a particularly good performance by the low standards of an IPS panel. This screen falls short of covering the basic sRGB color gamut, and peak brightness is woeful at less than 200 nits after calibrating out the hideously strong blue cast this display shows out of the box. It's still completely usable indoors, but it won't put up much of a fight against bright sunlight. With all that being said, this display outperforms most new laptops in the same price bracket, and there is a 4K panel with full Adobe RGB coverage available in these, which would undoubtedly be a much nicer experience if you can find one. Compared directly with the IdeaPad though, this is a mind-blowingly superior screen, so that's another point to the ThinkPad. One of the more recognizable parts of a ThinkPad is its almost but not quite unique combination of a trackpad and track point, both of which are present here. If you've gotten used to more modern trackpads, you're likely to find both of these pointing devices a bit of a disappointment, since they're Synaptics products from the dark ages predating precision touchpads. So there's quite a bit of input lag and jitter in the movement of the cursor. That said, both the separate and integrated buttons have a lovely solid action, and the trackpad is very solidly mounted and doesn't rattle at all. The full-size keyboard features a full-size number pad and a white backlight with an annoying habit of turning itself off. In typical ThinkPad fashion, the key mechanisms themselves have an unusually long stroke and the keycaps are nicely dished and extremely stable. This keyboard is far nicer to type on than what you'd find in cheaper machines, and there's absolutely no rattling nor flexing whatsoever anywhere in the keyboard deck thanks to that strong magnesium frame. By the way, welcome to what I think is the first nuclear notebook video in which I don't complain about non-replaceable keyboards. Hallelujah. Overall, this is a proven combination of input devices, and this setup is vastly nicer, vastly more durable, and infinitely more repairable than what you get on the IdeaPad. 3 points. Audio is controlled by a Realtek ALC3287 chip, which seems to predominantly be used in Lenovo laptops and may be a custom chip, so it's hard to find precise specifications for this one. Lenovo specifies 2 watts per channel going into the inbuilt speakers, which are a pair of nice-looking rectangular drivers sharing a fairly small common cabinet and firing directly upward just below the display. Even though the sound is nothing to get excited about, this setup is far better than what you'll find in cheaper machines, and the upward firing position is always preferable. Given what we're comparing it to, I'd say audio quality is another easy win for this machine. Storage is a 256GB Samsung PM981A, which is a PCIe 3 NVMe SSD. This drive is equipped with TLC NAND flash and a Samsung 5-core drive controller with DRAM. No cost cutting here. Read and write speeds are excellent, being about as fast as these PCIe 3 drives can get. Great stuff for a 6-year-old laptop, although it is nothing special by modern standards. Wireless connectivity is provided by an Intel 9560 chip supporting AC Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 5. It would be nice to swap this out with more modern AX Wi-Fi, but you can't because for no good reason it's soldered onto the board. Lame. Buried in the ghastly mess of antenna cables, this particular machine also features a Fibocom L850GL card supporting LTE and WCDMA wireless internet for the 3 people in the world who could use it. I think integrated mobile connectivity in laptops is silly, so I've got no interest in testing this out. Unfortunately, it's not possible to yoink the LTE card out for better Wi-Fi or a second SSD, as the slot is keyed differently. Since the IdeaPad has socketed Wi-Fi, we're begrudgingly awarding it 1 point. Boo. The elderly 55 watt-hour battery fitted to this unit is still happily reporting 55 watt-hours, and that is almost definitely a bold-faced lie. Since it's refusing to report its current capacity correctly, we're flying blind on this one. In my usual heavy internet test, the battery gave up after only 3 hours and 43 minutes. Sitting idle on the Windows desktop, it managed to cling on for just 7 hours and 28 minutes. Yep, this goose is cooked. If, like me, you do need to replace the battery in one of these, you'll be delighted to find that not only are genuine Lenovo batteries still readily available, but the battery is also super easy to replace, being held in by 3 screws and a couple of clips. Lovely. The good-looking CPU fitted to this machine is Intel's Core i7-8665U. This is the first generation of Intel's ULV chips moving to a quad-core design, and despite a few enhancements here and there, it's effectively 4 14nm Skylake cores choked down to 15 watts. That might sound bad, and it is, but as you'll see in the performance section, this chip is still looking pretty crunchy when the room's full of potatoes. Taking up the least space possible on that Core i7 is an Intel UHD 620, and this right here is the Achilles heel of this system. This is Intel graphics from the dark age, and a low-end variant at that, so set your expectations appropriately. Memory fitted to this unit is 16GB of DDR4 2400 in single channel, which is unfortunately soldered directly onto the motherboard. As a consolation prize, there's still a single slot for upgrades, but there's no use for more than 16 gigs of memory in a machine like this, so it would have been nice if it was simply dual channel from the factory. Still, there is a socket, so that's 1 for the ThinkPad. The T590's cooling system is as close to basic as they get, with a single heat pipe wicking heat away to a single fan blowing out the right-hand side. All major components are made out of copper, and there's the unusual addition of a temperature probe attached to the end of the fin stack. The cold plate surface is machined to a pretty nice finish with no obvious scoring or pitting, and there are a full 4 screws anchoring it to the CPU for even pressure distribution. Without the fan, the cooler assembly weighs 43 grams. This compares favorably to the coolers used in cheaper laptops with similar power budgets, so this cooler will absorb an above average amount of heat in burst workloads without needing to kick the fan speed up. Everything about this setup is a solid step above what you get in a typical cheap laptop, so that's another 1 for the ThinkPad. It's a basic expectation that a 15-watt chip will be able to run at 15 watts, but you can't take anything for granted, so to get a clear picture of how the T590 copes with a sustained workload, we've run Cinebench R23 for a full 30 minutes with the machine flat on the desk in its highest performance mode. Sensor data is logged approximately every second. After a very brief, half-hearted romp up to 25 watts, the CPU rapidly flops back down to 17 watts and then gradually wafts towards its 16 watt rating, ultimately stabilizing at just about 15.6 watts. Seems like Lenovo took the TDP rating very seriously on this one. Core frequency follows a very similar pattern, rocketing up to the peak boost speed of 4.8 GHz before plummeting straight back down to earth and slowly sinking to a 2.4 GHz floor. Base clock speed is rated at 1.9 GHz on these, so it's operating well above spec. If you're unfamiliar with what core temperatures usually look like in these machines, you might want to sit down for this one. Yep. In completely typical fashion for this sort of office machine, the T590 is effectively using core temperature to regulate the power delivery, so it romps up to 100 degrees under load and pretty much refuses to budge. Remember that high core temperature readouts are usually not a bad thing and don't mean other components are running hot. This is, after all, only 15 watts of heat, and these 14nm Intel chips have been proving for the better part of a decade that they can do this all day, every day until the heat death of the universe. External case temperatures after an extended load test are kept nice and cool with only the slightest warm spot above and below the heatsink. Neither the ThinkPad nor the IdeaPad get a point for this section, since while the IdeaPad runs its CPU nearly 30 degrees cooler, it does so with far more noise emissions from the cooler. When it comes to performance, I was genuinely surprised by how well this aging low-wattage Core i7 compares to the chips currently available in entry-level machines. In fact, compared to the similarly priced IdeaPad 1's Athlon 7120U, the older chip is anywhere from 40% to more than 100% faster without even using any more power. It's important to remember that the IdeaPad ships with only 4GB of soldered-on RAM, so a lot of the performance delta here is simply due to the ThinkPad coming with 4 times as much memory. Still, at current prices, this is the second cheapest laptop in these charts, and it compares favorably on price to performance with everything else here. ThinkPad 1, IdeaPad emphatically 0. Solid benchmark performance translates perfectly into solid performance in general use. For most simple tasks, the T590 is indistinguishable from a far newer computer with absolutely none of the lag and endless loading screens plaguing the IdeaPad. As long as you're sticking to more basic tasks that don't call for more performance or a better display, you can get along just fine on one of these. Now, I'm not too sure anyone's getting pumped to try gaming on an Intel UHD 620, but it's completely out of the question with single channel RAM, so for this section I've chucked in an additional stick for dual channel mode. This was always an extremely weak GPU, and with a 15 watt cap, there's only so much you can expect from this one. 2015's Dying Light, which has become our de facto potato benchmark, runs a hell of a lot better than it did on the IdeaPad 1, but since it's still far from a nice experience, it's a pretty hollow victory. Still, ThinkPad 1, IdeaPad -1 because what the hell is this garbage? So, we have a very obvious winner. Having proven itself to be a solid, reliable, and fast enough laptop over 6 years, the ThinkPad T590 earns itself an official nuclear notebook rating of certified tank, and a strong recommendation that anyone shopping at the low end consider looking into a refurbished and warranted ThinkPad T series, or something from the very similar Dell Latitude 5000 or 7000 series instead. Believe me, you'll be doing yourself and the planet a favor. I'm sure a lot of people watching this video will be curious about the lack of Linux testing, and of course, yes, the T590 runs Linux beautifully, as does the IdeaPad 1, but we've kept the review within the same format as the last 6 videos to make the comparisons easier. This is the last Nuclear Notebook video that will focus solely on Windows performance, since we've revamped our testing methodology to be thoroughly Linux-centric moving forward. For now though, and on an unusually positive note, I'll see you next time, where we move up in the world from bottom-dwelling potatoes to some gaming-grade garbage.